Guild Wars is a pair of MMOs created in different times with different budgets for different reasons and different audiences. They're years apart, worlds apart, but happen to share a map. It's almost easier to describe the games in terms of what they aren't. They aren't normal. You are one of three kinds of people. Either you've played Guild Wars in some form or another, heard of Guild Wars because it's decently popular, or you're a fetus and shouldn't be watching YouTube videos. It's so much brain rot. Get it together, fetus. Do better, fetus. In either game, you control a hero and batter down hordes of monsters. It's fantasy. You swing swords, you cast spells. You've heard this all before. What you might not know is exactly how bizarre the original game is, how much game there is, and that Guild Wars 2 has an item that does this. Well, that's concerning. Forget what you know about MMOs. To thrive in Tyria, this is Tyria. You have to become a master tactician, your own chief strategist, or have friends and get carried. Guild Wars isn't written about very often. 2 decades of history and so few words spilled. Why is that? It's saddled with a load of YouTube content, informative material produced by interested players, but very little in terms of analysis, critique, or personal reflection. At the same time, there are legitimate logistical barriers at play. Guild Wars is enormous. 2 whole MMOs that play completely differently with their own internal histories. To cover the thing completely, you'd have to sacrifice years of your life. At least. Thankfully, we're a little choosier here. But this project did take 2 years to get rolling. I had hours of footage stocked between both games before a hard drive failure last year set me back some 200 hours. What's that old quote? Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. I like that. Stiff upper lip for the emergency response team. Needless to say, I've played a lot of Guild Wars, both of them, and instead of giving up when all that footage vanished, I went back. I think it's worth a look. The visuals, the mechanics, there's a richness in the tangled threads of the series' design, and you expect that, looking at the team. Games like Guild Wars don't crop up very often. MMOs are simply too much to handle for the average team, and hardly worth the risk. Bringing people together isn't easy, even digitally. And launching a game like the original, it's a sign of the times, I guess. You won't find anything like it today, or ever again if we're being honest. Those crunchy mechanics came together because a handful of ex-Blizzard developers left the company before some of their other former coworkers would leave the company as well, to form their own studio in the year 2000. It was initially called Triforge, so named after the trio of colleagues who faced a burgeoning online computer games market side by side: Mike O'Brien, Patrick Wyatt, and Jeff Strain. This trio worked on Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, etc., and crucially, had extensive experience with Blizzard's online infrastructure, Battle.net. They probably figured they had the combined skills to do something amazing. And they were right.
The founders have sat almost everywhere in the company.
I've worked at a lot of places, and there's nowhere that I've ever worked where the 3 founders of the company would sit in the hallway and work.
But we tend to sit wherever we can do some good.
Yeah, being sat right next to, micromanaged by your boss. Don't even get me started on his tuna sandwiches stinking up the room. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Of course, I don't want to give the founders all the credit. It's a long-standing studio with a host of talented artists, developers, and a collaborative atmosphere, if their own documentaries count for anything. ArenaNet persisted through the years in the face of intense monetary challenges, the price of operating an MMO as a small studio. The company strategically steered itself through a series of rough patches and sudden upsets, and their solid infrastructure meant that the departures of Patrick Wyatt and Jeff Strain before the sequel released, and even eventually Mike O'Brien down the road, did not kill ArenaNet. Others picked up the torch and carried it along. It's not surprising. Designing Guild Wars was always a collaborative process.
I want our employees to reach out to our customers, get to know me as a person, have a direct interaction with me. Let me know what you think about our games. We're making these games for you, for our customers. We should know what you think.
That's crazy. Steve Jobs would have just shot those people. Still, ArenaNet exists because these 3 developers linked up and went looking for a publisher all those years ago. While they talked to quite a few, only NCSoft seemingly understood exactly what they wanted to do. So Guild Wars was born. This game is known for a lot of things, namely systemic complexity and aesthetics, but the beta version of Guild Wars was very different. This prototype build shown at E3 2003 isn't at all like the game that's endured so long. It's generic. Honestly, and as sad as I am to say it, it looks like a crustier World of Warcraft. You know, what if World of Warcraft only had humans? What fun! This might as well be the dwarf starting zone. Come on, guys. Admittedly, the line to play was capped every day, and people ate it up like cotton candy at a county fair, which might seem odd. But there really weren't games like this. Huge online experiences in full 3D. I mean, WoW was still on the way, and history was a blank canvas. If you squint, you can see animations, textures, the bones that would eventually evolve into something recognizable, but the earliest version was notable for its apparent lack of visual direction. It just doesn't work. And art, aesthetics, are core to ArenaNet's entire proposition. They were known for their looks before anything else.
This has, been part of Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2 was to make something that was artisanal, handcrafted, and to make something that didn't look computer generated.
Like, relatively speaking. Guild Wars launched in April 2005, just 5 months after the original World of Warcraft. Maybe a day late, and $1 short, because Blizzard, who'd lost 3 key developers some years ago, was set to launch a game that rewrote the MMO concept. The packaging says it all. Guild Wars was for skilled, strategically minded players. Any dweeb could raid through the week in World of Warcraft, collecting gear and overpowering poor parents and bad internet havers, as long as said dweeb's mom or wife served them a steady stream of Pepsi and Hot Pockets. So ArenaNet made it plain that if you were one of the worthy ones, you wouldn't need to know life Guild Wars. You could play Guild Wars and have a girlfriend. Sure, they're ignoring the fact that time is at least half of skill building, but you have to respect the desire to manipulate ego-heavy gamers into trying something real stanky. Let's be honest here, Guild Wars is not for everyone. It's a little unhinged, but there it is, looking absolutely prestige in frame. What's wrong with you people? Combine skills from 2 professions. Link them yourself or chain them with a teammate. A deadly combination. Strike with a hamstring attack to cripple your fleeing opponent, then rain fire down upon him as he slowly limps away. I have to stop for a sec. Never do this in-game. This is not... No, putting this on the box is criminal. In fact, this build proposition was so bad, it's jokingly referred to as Hamstorm by the community. That is, Hamstring and Firestorm. It became a community joke. Now, you could build a warrior/elementalist, and they could be good, but you definitely could not use sword skills while not wielding a sword, and retrospectively, who made this? Someone who's never played Guild Wars. Regardless, the point was made. The game was strategic, customizable, built for online play. It's free. You buy the game and have internet. They definitely lie a good amount on the box, though. The world does not dynamically evolve with new material. The missions are actually crafted for themselves, and not for you, okay? This isn't adaptive difficulty. You're going to die. And no spawn camping. No one else is in the world. Like, this is not funny, haha, like dead game, lol. No, PvE, regular gameplay, is all instanced. You only encounter other people if you invite them. Maybe most important, though, is that Guild Wars was beautiful. I'm going to touch on aesthetics throughout the video because they're exceptional, and it even extends to things like box art. You probably recognize that goth chick from a few different printings of the game. She isn't the official ambassador, of course. Nobody is. Guild Wars had multiple different covers featuring different high-resolution images of characters who represented the assorted classes. Eve the Necromancer happens to have stood the test of time, and it's not particularly surprising, because these colors contrast nicely. Why would you put Menlo on the box? Of course, nothing in Guild Wars even approaches this level of fidelity. Developers liked throwing a game-inaccurate render on official packaging to move units. It's the big first impression, and it meant something. While World of Warcraft used illustrations, ArenaNet wanted to make a point about technology, as if to say, this is the future. And it's not completely misleading. Guild Wars was stunning for its time, at least looking at general model fidelity, but it also isn't a completely fair comparison. World of Warcraft had to maintain playable zones with so many active players and enemies, where Guild Wars' player count was strategically limited during regular play so they could impart greater detail to individual models without compromising performance. Just compare these characters. On the left, we have one of the most beautiful men ever crafted. On the right, we have Boog, son of Oog. ArenaNet was committed to beauty, maybe trying to seize what the competition couldn't by virtue of its own size and popularity. Blizzard had previously made compromises in Warcraft 3 for the sake of accessibility, catering to those with weaker machines, and WoW was no different, even considering its whopping 6 GB size. Guild Wars was leaner, but prettier in frame. Wait a minute, this isn't gorgeous at all. I'm sure this barren hellscape ends somewhere, right? Last thing about box art. These two titles existed in the same relative space at the same time. WoW sold itself with its fantastical elements and not with its humans. Guild Wars exclusively sold itself with humans. Of course, it's all they had available, but it makes the game pop in an unexpected way. Character creation is an extension of everything we just covered. You can have a character of any color as long as it's human. There are no elves, no playable dwarves. Guild Wars manages to choke an amount of aesthetic variance out of its game by allowing only a single playable type of person. Yes, there are men and women, but for the most part, there are women.
The character I always like to play is an elementalist, just because, well, first off, I play female characters, because if you're going to be playing a role-playing game, you're going to look at the same character for a long period of time. Why not look at a female character, right? So I play the elementalist because she's hot.
Okay, settle down, Dick Jerkofferson. Guild Wars is not a typical MMO experience. You actually have to pick a campaign for your character to start in from among the ones you already own. This is one of those strategic decisions that helped Guild Wars survive, by the way. You could buy the core game or buy a standalone expansion and actually be able to run the game, which is not true of buying, say, the Burning Crusade. The Prophecies campaign is limited to 6 classes because it's the base experience, though it's a little odd in retrospect that you can't pick, say, an assassin from the Factions campaign and either of the other campaigns if you own them, and presumably because your character can't encounter a lore-accurate mentor figure or whatever other justification. It's an annoying little detail that manages to preserve the integrity of the narrative. Your whims are not greater than the world. Your chosen class matters, but Guild Wars did something interesting by turning every character into a hybrid. You're dropped into the world, given some time to figure yourself out, and then you take on another class. Guild Wars is a game populated by second-class citizens. And there are no meaningful restrictions. You absolutely can choose to play a warrior that hurls fireballs. You really shouldn't, but you can. A lot of people used to play warrior monks, and that checks out. I'll hit them really hard and be hard to kill, and when I dip low, I'll heal myself. It's genius! But therein lies the struggle. Guild Wars did a lot of fantasticizing with its marketing, its box copy, its promise. But the game has rules, limits, systems that make certain class combinations unfeasible, or if they are viable, it's only in particular contexts. For example, the community mocked Whammo, the warrior monk, is actually a decent speedrun character if you know the game thoroughly, and we know this because a speedrunner did just that. It's legitimately impressive, but that character exists because someone had a clear idea, ascended knowledge of the encounters and mechanics they would face, and crafted their experience just so. Which explains a lot of Guild Wars, actually. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This is 2005, before the game was solved and before information was massively available. To the newcomer, Guild Wars was a land of opportunity, a beautiful game, customizable and skill-based, PvP-ready, and no recurring fees. It was a time for joy, experimentation, and trauma. First-time Guild Wars players, people who bought the vanilla game or started a Prophecies campaign character later on, and only those players, are dropped into a sort of tutorial zone. This is Ascalon. It's stunning, and it's introduced with a warning.
The last day dawns on the kingdom of Ascalon. Those who will remember will speak fondly of the warm morning breeze. People carry on with their daily lives, unaware that in a short while, everything they have ever known will come to an end.
The player is given no context for these words. They load in, look around, and usually start exploring the picturesque countryside. Of course, you can leave at any time, There's an NPC who will end the tutorial, as it were, on request and move you to the next leg of the story, just a light jog from where you start. It's unusual for a person to do this except for speedrunners, because most people are naturally inclined to poke around, try to figure out their character, maybe investigate the situation a little, before skipping ahead. It's also not recommended to leave too soon, because the next chapter assumes a certain level of player strength, so newcomers will probably hit a wall for being hasty. You're not meant to leave. You're invited to savor the moment. Of all the zones in Guild Wars 1, Ascalon is easily the most beautiful. Please ignore the unfinished city. Please don't look behind there. No! In fact, it's only in the expansions that we're able to explore anything remotely approaching the raw visual decadence of this region. Pale light pours through dense autumn leaves. A bright blue stream courses through hills of green and gold. A small farming town lies just down the weathered stone road. A churning water wheel looms here, as if to say, this moment is forever. Despite being the tutorial, this area doesn't really function like the others. You can group up with other players if you happen to socialize, but I imagine most people quest alone in these early moments, journeying through the level, pressing buttons, and collecting loot, like any other MMO. You'll get a taste for proper mission play after a string of quests, placing you in a party of NPCs to root out a local threat, but otherwise, your time in Ascalon is quaint, quiet, and peaceful. NPCs have little quests: fetch a girl's lost flute or deliver these goods. If not for the invaders at the gate, the Char, you never know Ascalon was in peril. You can climb the highest peak and catch a glimpse of the wider world. There are great and magical things to discover if you go looking. You can plumb the lowest depths and find monsters that lurk in the most secluded shadows. It's not a truly safe world, but as a hero in your own domain, it's nothing you can't handle alone. Why don't you mind your own fucking business? As you're lulled into the flow of the game with easy encounters and minimal buttons, you'll eventually pick up a second class. I made a Mesmer Elementalist in my first time through, and here I'm playing a Warrior Ranger. I mocked the Warrior Elementalist combo, and I want to be clear that it does have viable builds because the classes are fairly limited. Of the available 6, only 1 is a recognizable tank, the Warrior. Only 1 is a recognizable healer, the Monk. Only 2 primarily deal in physical damage, and a whopping 4 are casters, the Necromancer, Elementalist, Mesmer, and Monk. There really aren't many options for early warriors except to pick up a bow or sling spells. If you hate what you make, you can always restart anyway. In a very long game, Ascalon is a blink. Apparently it was a last-minute inclusion, which is fascinating because it ended up defining the experience for early players.
That got added pretty late. That was kind of an 11th hour addition. I think it made the game, honestly.
No matter how you spend your time, you'll eventually realize that you can't stay still forever. You don't need to complete every quest, and your level is getting a little high. Maybe you even scoured the entire region and completed everything. You need to leave. Like Falling Leaves, Guild Wars tutorial is a reminder that nothing good can last, a lesson we never stop learning.
It was on that day that the Char discovered a way around the Great Wall, a way to bring it down.
In a stomach-churning jerk, the land you knew is uprooted in a cutscene. This is the Searing, a cataclysm invoked by an enemy commander. Fire rains from the sky, buildings crumble, and the remnants of Ascalon's citizenry cling together for survival amidst an onslaught of invading beastmen. Everything you knew is gone.
My husband actually started playing first, and I was just reading a book on the couch. I glanced up and saw this beautiful, pastoral landscape, and I wanted to play too.
So then we lit it all on fire and smashed it into little pieces and pissed on the flames. The trees are burnt and barren. The stream evaporates, or else unclean water snakes through the land's scars. And that little farming village is not. All those people, the little girl whose flute you returned, the beekeeper, the peasants, vanished. You fell into the world like a head on a pillow. You grew familiar with the place. Very possibly built bonds in that flickering moment with its people and other players. And the game doesn't simply move you out of the level. It obliterates Ascalon. burns it to ash, and tells you to wander through again and pick up the pieces. The end of the tutorial signals a lot of things. The end of the near-Edenic steady-state world, the beginning of the real gameplay experience, and an emotional fork. Two roads diverge in a once yellow wood. The player can return to pre-Searing Ascalon by starting a new character. Rewind to a time when things were better. Or they can press on, like the game expects, into an uncertain future. It's kind of poignant from a development perspective. ArenaNet wasn't indie, but it was far less equipped than Blizzard to deliver an epic MMO. Most reactions to Guild Wars wouldn't exist in a vacuum, and would rather be spoken with implicit knowledge of the looming specter that was, and still is, World of Warcraft. Pre-Searing Ascalon isn't exactly like WoW, but it's the closest Guild Wars gets to feeling how an MMO ought to. Choosing to move past green grass and blue skies is a spiritual acceptance on the part of the player to see what else the game has in store, even if it's a little different than they expected. And this might all seem like an exaggeration, but it's a fact that everything after the Searing is an entirely different game. Normal players can't progress alone. Guild Wars isn't called One Guy Wars. It's about guilds, or at the very least, groups of people. Something that's very easy to overlook when you're adventuring the idyllic fields alone. You have to embrace change to advance. I guess it would probably help if I described Guild Wars mechanically. Interested parties asking, is this like? No. Guild Wars isn't designed like other MMOs. Some people take issue with the MMO label because it isn't what they're used to, coming off World of Warcraft. I'm comfortable using the term because it's exactly how the developers thought of and sold their game. Genre is messy and not very useful for meaningful conversations anyway, but you can see how some folks get tripped up. MMOs usually ask players to run around a big, well-populated world doing small quests to level up, and eventually leave the zone behind at their discretion. And the tutorial zone acts that way for a while. Before the part where it rips out your heart. You venture the realm as a solo traveler, doing small tasks for small people, leveling up and gaining skills, always free to move on at your discretion. But when you do, and the world changes, you're suddenly thrust into a very different game. Regular play isn't about pursuing your own goals, parallel with other players, but instead living through the same set of events as everyone else in separate universes. Every open field area, anywhere with monsters, is instanced, meaning that when you walk out of the city gates, you're effectively cut off from the broader online population unless you've invited them into your party. It's like a solo player's dream, a world where you can escape other people. And we need to be clear here. In the early days, group play was much more common. It was a fresh, exciting time to be online. People would reach out, ask for help, group up on a whim, which does not describe the play reality 20 years later. It was probably a significantly easier run because your NPC companions are not very smart. Dude, what are you doing? In the end, going back to Guild Wars feels more or less how post-Searing Ascalon feels. Bleak, challenging, with only spots of color to rebuff the crushing gloom. There are players, and one of them even carried me through a few missions, but only the one time, and the footage is gone, so I can't prove it. But that was really cool, random necromancer dude. Even still, the game is designed so that no player needs friends or even strangers, and that's pretty forward thinking for 2005. I guess no WoW player needs anyone to reach level cap, but the point is, most of what Guild Wars is can optionally be a fully single-player experience. Apparently, your class of choice could hamper your group opportunities, at least according to this developer, but her story only works to illustrate the game's systemic strengths.
A lot. I played the assassin class from Factions, and at the time, that was the most hated class. Getting a group to want an assassin because it was just flooded at the time was nearly impossible in Guild Wars 1, especially right after Factions. So what I ended up having to do was become a leader. I'll be the leader, I'll form up this group to go into this mission. And at times we would sometimes have 4 assassins, and they were like, there's no way we can do this. And I said, yes, there is, okay? I have this build, if you do this build, and if you try this build, right? We try it, we succeed. And they were always impressed when we could finish at the end, and we could. When I reflect back on it, it was kind of the first time I got confidence in being a leader. It sounds silly, but this game taught me what does it mean to be a leader, especially in hard times.
You could play what you wanted to play, but you had to work for it. Assassins do incredible damage in the faction's expansion, but they're also overly squishy in a game that rewards casters. However, with a specific ability, they become the best tank in the game. Depending on their secondary classes, they could fill all kinds of alternative roles. It's a powerful mastery fantasy that's entirely separate from how, say, WoW is handling things. When I picked up a Warlock so long ago, I exclusively wanted to summon Infernals. That's it. Guild Wars asked a little more from people, and that's probably why its core was so strong for so long. And it needed a strong backbone of players because the story is most of the immediately available material for anyone afraid of PvP. Story progress is divided into group-based missions. You're given a gallery of henchmen, NPC allies to shore up whatever your character can't do. As you progress through the story, you'll gain access to more and more henchmen until your total party is 8 soldiers strong, and you rove the fields, mugging every hostile. It feels less like a typical MMO adventure and more like ferrying a steel-clad blob through the countryside, killing every last breathing entity in the known world. Because Progress is an on-rails series of story missions, the player is actually tuned into the plot, at least compared to its immediate competition. While your character is not incredibly relevant, simply acting as another pawn on the board while the kings and queens of the game decide the fate of nations, you're present regardless as responsibility piles up on you and your party. Your people, the Ascalonians, are scattered, and you're searching for a way forward, a soft place to land, if you can escape the Charm. Any of Tyria's heroes could carry the torch, but you're the only one around, because everyone else is instanced out, so it's on you. What they don't tell you about Guild Wars is that you better like your character and like tweaking skills because the vast majority of playtime is spent killing monsters, animals, groups of people with well-coordinated outfits. It's basically a game about testing your squad's capabilities against whatever haunts any particular region. And you don't just wipe out a few. We're talking thousands and thousands of monsters by the time you've reached the end of any campaign. Your character is so blood-soaked, they should genuinely be suffering from PTSD. Sure, the meadows are pretty, but buddy, these are the killing fields, and no one gets out clean. Death is a little quirkier than you might expect here. Your armor isn't completely destroyed for a few measly deaths, and repairs are fairly cheap. Either way, you're given a decent amount of wiggle room while still feeling the sting, as it were. Death gives you a stacking debuff that jumps every time you die, but critically you can work off your debuff debt by winning in battle, and it's entirely erased when you leave whatever mission or enter a town. This is admittedly Death Spiral design. If you're struggling, encounters will only get harder, but the trick is, a 15% debuff is not as game-breaking as you would think, and you can pull through incredibly brutal missions with raw effort if you keep throwing yourself against enemies. Yes, sometimes you hit a wall because you need a better party setup, need particular skills, or need new armor because it's early game and you forgot to keep up. But it feels fair because you usually only have to play better. I was completely stuck in one mission for a few reasons and finally broke through by very carefully thinning enemy ranks with hero commands and eventually managed to survive the final onslaught, despite a fat stack of death debuff. And I was miserable up until that point because this is the mission that filtered me as a teenager, but I finally earned the win with mechanics and patience. Still, the game is not easy. Sure, if you've logged hundreds of hours, you'll probably scoff, but Guild Wars suffers from its age in a unique way. Unless you're specifically designed as a human to enjoy this kind of play, unless this hole was made for you to fill, you'll probably quit before long. Pre-searing Ascalon is gorgeous, but the game immediately sends you to a charred wasteland, dotted with ominous ruins and crystals, sure, but barren. Enemies hit hard and you slog through them, battle after battle. It takes actual hours to progress, and you're often caught backtracking or hunting through huge open spaces littered with enemy char to complete the next quest, to get more levels, to make more equipment, to take on another major mission. I think it's an obnoxious cliche to say, the game didn't age well because it's overly reductive. Lots of old stuff plays just fine, and graphics aren't really a concern unless you're 5. Guild Wars is sharp, and interestingly, massively enjoyable for a specific kind of player, and simply does not care if you're on board. You know, if you can't take it, they made another anyway, and it's free, so go. That's not an exaggeration. If you want to take a break, from a task in another MMO. There are endless avenues from starting another character, just for the sake of starting another character, and it'll let you get a different taste of the world, see another side of the game. Picking a new race in Guild Wars 2 will drop you into a completely unique zone, just like WoW. But the original Guild Wars is only ever experienced in mechanically different ways. Two characters running through the Prophecies campaign will experience all of the same things. There's very little room for individual player adventures and experiences. The way I meandered from Elwyn to Westfall to Stranglethorn in WoW is not a possibility here. ArenaNet actually partially addressed this later on. After pumping out a number of expansions, players are free to walk their character into another campaign after a certain story threshold, more or less after finishing the early game. And with most players reaching the level cap before or around this point, they're technically free to take control of their playthrough. Of course, ArenaNet thought people wanted to fight and figured they'd just leave to go play PvP, which is not much of an option these days. Sure, you can, if you want to wait around to get erased by the hunts who never moved on. I made a point to mention PvP early, but it deserves special mention because of the game's title. Yeah, they do that apparently. It might feel weird playing Guild Wars today and hitting level cap long before the midpoint of whatever campaign. Can I quit? Can I go right now? What am I doing here? And while you were still allowed to play on, you could easily dive out if you had the right friends or a guild to play with, like getting whisked out of a mid-level zone to do endgame stuff. One of the early developers mentioned in the Making of Guild Wars 25th anniversary video that the original concept was actually meant to serve the PvP side of things, with the PvE material acting as a tutorial.
Originally, we assumed that PvE would be sort of a staging ground for people to learn the core mechanics of the game, and then eventually they would shift over to the PvP side of the game. And we actually found throughout the development that players really gravitated towards the sort of PvE side of Guild Wars 1, but it turns out that people really just wanted more of that PvE experience.
I hang in a lot of spaces where MMO players, especially people used to FF14, can't imagine playing an MMO and not caring about the story. Which is fascinating because that's exactly the ecosystem many MMO players grew up in. Not only was the story either minimal or relegated to background noise, but people were more interested in chasing high levels of power, compulsively gaming, or crushing other players, killing them dead, /spit on that thing. And that's how the developers thought of it too, even. Regardless of their unique structuring, which forced players to get on board with the plot anyway, they initially thought people would gravitate towards PvP and leave the PvE missions behind, which is the opposite of what actually happened. The world itself changed to suit the interests of its player base. People liked the core and wanted to push it without getting too competitive. Looking back, it makes perfect sense to me that the grand majority of players preferred PvE material. Not everyone had sterling internet, and most people tend to avoid competition, whether out of a fear of looking incompetent or like being a reincarnated deer. Who can say? So maybe surprisingly, PvP wasn't a small side thing, how it is in many other games. Shoot, even WoW refused to explicitly balance for PvP until significantly later on, and even now it's often treated as secondary to raid material, which is why nerfs and buffs intended for the PvE space bleed into PvP, for no good reason. You weren't expected to cringe away. I'm not sure if PvP is for me. Because the game is so mechanically stiff and so combat-oriented, you've already effectively seen what PvP will look like by the time you ever enter the ring. You already know how it goes, you just have to learn this environment's metagame and deal with the real people on the other side of the screen. It's really just like any other mission. Unlike other MMOs of the era, you weren't given a paltry handful of battlegrounds, but piles of modes. Single-player, team battles, competitive parallel play missions, and of course, Guild Wars, or battles where the only objective was doming the enemy leader. Simple in theory, fascinating in practice. For as flat and stiff as play can feel, it was versatile enough to allow a range of modes, where WoW gave people Capture the Flag, King of the Hill, and the battleground that never ended. It's hard to imagine today unless you were there when it happened, but Guild Wars actually had competitive PvP tournaments. They hired cheerleaders for some reason, and had teams fly out to more or less enact the title. Yeah, we're the gamers. We're gonna drop a shit on them, fatty style. They put us in cages, help.
Yeah, it's like pretty much Yeah, it's yeah, pretty much. And I mean, I work at a 7-Eleven. This is probably going to be the most important thing I ever do in my life. Put that shit on my tombstone, bitch.
The first question any newcomer has is, who are the guilds and why are they at war? And while there's an actual lore answer to that question, and I won't tell you unless you're good, the game was originally conceptualized as a competitive PvP title. It's why you can create a dedicated PvP avatar the second you log in, already maxed out and reserved exclusively for that game mode. They wanted guilds, and they wanted them warring. And this isn't completely novel for the time. Other PC games absolutely held tournaments, even if the parents of those players hadn't caught up to the idea that you could make money playing video games competitively. It's just that most of those titles were Blizzard titles. ArenaNet tried to force its way into that ecosystem and ultimately didn't last. Guild Wars 2 has a lot of PvP. Guild Wars 2 is not known for its PvP, but this half of play is important because it explains a lot about Guild Wars. While the game looks beautiful, it's not the kind of world you can reach out into. It's not an action game. In fact, it's closer to strategy, and that's by design.
From a long time back, the founders of this company have always wanted to combine strategic elements and role-playing elements in a game. As we've developed strategy games, we've seen that the more that we add role-playing elements to the strategy game, the more that the world feels like an immersive world.
And that's how we got all this. Most MMOs are structured so that level cap unlocks the real game, as it were. Rating, PvP, etc., whatever you're going to spend an unhealthy number of hours doing and straining your relationship with. But that usually comes after a hefty chunk of investment. The grind is real. Guild Wars doesn't ask nearly as much of the player, except that they learn the systems organically and sink a few hours into demonstrating competency. After that, guild membership and whatever your guild is interested in becomes the end game for most people, outside of running old missions on hard mode and farming materials. Until then, you're tethered to the story. Oh, I see the whole gamer Discord is here. Your character will only ever reach level 20, and you'll hit 20 less than halfway into any given campaign. It functions more as a mild learning gate than anything because skill points are handed out with every level, which lets you tailor your build to maximize specific kinds of skills, and you can unlock abilities for the entire leveling process and beyond, even capturing them from special enemies, meaning you're initially limited to how much you can experiment early, and by the time you know what your class does, and have been made to perform that role through multiple missions, you'll be much more confident in mix-matching your character's many options. You're allowed to find yourself in the world over a generous period of time, freely allowed to change what you don't like, unlike another game and master play with investment. Now, story missions, the core of gameplay for most people, usually challenge you from a specific angle. Maybe an overwhelming single enemy needs to be debuffed or managed otherwise while you whittle it down. Or you face a swarm of enemies and need to prioritize AoE abilities. Maybe they just do a pile of damage up front and you need choice skills to survive. It can be frustrating to experience firsthand if you're the wrong kind of class, or brought the wrong kind of henchman, or didn't bring the right kind of move. It's entirely possible to wind up dead 5, 10, 30 minutes into any mission. And that dynamic never really changes unless you're helped along by human allies. You are never not trapped in the prison of your own inability, as long as you're playing alone. It's actually a little insidious. Like I mentioned, some missions are not easy, even early on, and while different characters will meet challenges differently, you're always incentivized to hop in general chat and look for a group. Guild Wars wanted players collaborating and solving problems together, instead of handling everything alone. It's part of the narrative, even. You need a group to handle a level-appropriate dungeon in World of Warcraft. It isn't optional, but you simply look for group, clear it, and move on, right back to solo questing. Guild Wars had people grouping up through entire regions, bouncing ideas back and forth, sharing builds, and tweaking them alongside one another, threading human interactions into a mesh that made its core incredibly strong, at least for the people who played it, way back when. It didn't matter if you were slogging it out for hours through scores and scores of monsters, you were having fun with your friends. Did you know these games have internal wiki support? You can bring the Guild Wars wiki up in-game with a simple command. We all know the guy who pops in general to ask questions that could be resolved in a simple tab out and quick search. The guy who'd rather outsource his labor to the wider community at the cost of someone else's time and effort. Yeah, I'm calling you out. How dare you try to connect with a real human being? How dare you foster holistic growth and share knowledge? You make me sick. Also, in case it isn't obvious from the footage, Guild Wars, despite its systemic complexity, is a wildly simplistic game at a mechanical level. That is, only minimal room for kinetic player mastery exists, where World of Warcraft is fairly mechanically open, which makes PvP highly interesting. Any particular move in any direction rewrites the future of a match in real time. You can slow or crowd control enemies to hide behind a pillar and bandage yourself, for example, not to mention jump. Guild Wars is incredibly stiff by comparison. There is no jump, there is minimal incentive to move at all unless you're hunting someone down, and the core of play is hampered by the energy system. Characters have an energy bar that acts as a universal resource. You simply expend what you can and regenerate energy over time, meaning you're thoroughly gated by your character's ability to produce resources and expend them efficiently. This is the strategy element the devs and Gamebox were referring to. You have to keep your buffs rolling and your DPS preferably uninterrupted. Mesmers are so strong in skilled hands because the ability to destabilize resource parity with counters can upend entire battles. It feels balanced on the edge of a razor, with some matchups turning into complete standstills until someone or something changes the dynamic. This ultimately is the beauty of Guild Wars, navigating the numerical nightmare and getting the most out of your character, passing the trial that previously walled you, working together and growing alongside your friends. And it needed that, because the game world itself is actually pretty flat. Sure, it's pretty in places, but what's brutal about the original game, and especially after Ascalon, is how the world gives way to so much blank space. Places with some verticality, but few landmarks, so little to distinguish the zones or make them pop the way Ascalon did. Even in the barren aftermath, glowing crystals burst from the earth, storms raged, and grim ruins loomed. By the time you reach the snowy peaks, it's mostly the dwarven structures that lend life and fantasy to the environment. By the time you reach Kryta, the culturally distinct human civilization and its architecture make it stand out, but it's nothing too magical. Really, it's the towering implied scale of Lion's Arch and other nearby settlements that shore up a flat space, because fields and fields of snow and green don't really do much to sell fantasy. And this trend continues for huge portions of the Prophecies campaign. There's a sense that they blew their budget handling PvP, tacking on the pre-searing segment, or they just wanted to sell the idea of a land in ruin. Maybe Guild Wars was hamstrung aesthetically by its own development. God knows this isn't what it used to look like. I don't want to overreach and call it ugly. There's worth in this kind of aesthetic, where World of Warcraft was so focused on its cartoony or comic book-esque fantasy aesthetic and towering monoliths of ages past. Well, Guild Wars has those too. It's just that they almost look real. The Crystal Desert, a relatively late-game location, is mostly a sea of shimmering white sand speckled with ruins, with remnants of yet another human civilization. And it's a fascinating place, the kind you'd have existential 3 a.m. thoughts in, caught up in the ambience of the endless expanse, but it's so isolated. Crushing, even. Many of the game's maps are rough for being mainly littered with monsters. There isn't much to the world except killing and more killing, and space, and time. It casts the game in a fairly cynical light, stifling, almost hopeless, and that ultimately serves the plot. You're shepherding your people to new lands, proving yourself to ancient enemies for the sake of saving your desperate remnants and beating back the forces of evil. It's a fantasy game more interested in its various kingdoms and their cultures than it is in elves or orcs or whatever. Because Guild Wars, the first one, is about humans. People. So, after establishing its mechanics, I'd argue that Guild Wars took this conceit about people and culture and spun it into an identity. ArenaNet released multiple expansions, with the first launching a single calendar year, to the day, as the core game. It was followed by a second expansion only 6 months after the first.
In a game with no subscription fee, we're going to need expansions if we want to viably be able to pay to keep the business going. And we embarked on this absolutely crazy concept of every 6 months we were going to ship expansions.
And development concluded in August 2007 with the final expansion, Guild Wars: Eye of the North. This blistering series of releases coincide with the harsh reality that Guild Wars was not terribly successful in upending the competition. Not to slight ArenaNet, David and Goliath is like a 80-20 matchup at best. Vanilla World of Warcraft launched a handful of months before Guild Wars and only released its first expansion, The Burning Crusade, in 2007, some months before Eye of the North. They didn't have to fight to keep people hooked. I mentioned that I only started playing Guild Wars to take a break from World of Warcraft during that exact period. You could buy the expansions in a big bundle for cheap. Guild Wars, the budget title. It's cruel, but also how the game was probably perceived by outsiders, myself included at the time as a stupid teenager, as a good thing. But it's so brutal because Guild Wars only really stood fully apart from anyone else with these expansions. Let's rewind a bit and look at the classes. Guild Wars was pretty stock on launch. Warrior, Elementalist, Mage, Ranger, Monk, so Cleric, Necromancer, these are all expected. The only real standout in the original lineup is the Mesmer, which was originally called a Sorcerer in the early stages of development, but I'm glad they had at least one class that stood out. Magic is supposed to make the impossible possible, and fantasy enjoyers really struggle to move past, blowing people up. The Mesmer served damage, debuffs, and looks. The Mesmer was so absurdly demented, it had a spell called Empathy. Be called a Fab 5 now. If you showed this to a certain kind of person today, they'd scream. While the other classes act more or less how you'd expect, the Mesmer controls the battlefield with reactive and proactive magic that can totally trivialize entire missions. Whole challenges flushed, but this power is limited by player knowledge. You have to know beforehand what you're facing, how to counter it, and act accordingly. The Mesmer is one of the strongest classes for solo play, but only for a particularly engaged and aware player. It is the Guild Wars proposition in a class. And aside from systemic complexity, class mixing is the game. Think about it. You can't become an orc or elf or goblin or whatever. You can't express yourself, represent your body, as anything but a conventionally attractive, average height human. I love diverse aesthetics. One Piece haters hop on Guild Wars. But what it means is that players expressed their identity through their class combination, their unique skill loadouts, their play, and whatever armor they earned secondarily. Like the plain, barren, sort of generic European fantasy presented in Prophecies, characters and classes were visually generic to match. Worth was found, once again, in the systems and the mechanics. And this is why the expansions are so critical. Not only were they necessary for expanding the world of Tyria, casting it in different lights and hues, it also introduced new classes that represented the places they came from. And this is why it's important that those classes don't cross over freely into older expansions, frustrating as it is. A spiritual magic wielder, attuned to the ghosts of their isolationist nation, probably should not be in pre-searing Ascalon. Now, the Assassin, which launched with factions, probably shouldn't be region-specific except for flavor's sake, but the Ritualist is a religious figure that emblemizes different cultural mores and values. It even plays differently to the other common healer class, the Monk, by summoning spirits and even creating carryable objects. This sounds like a small thing, but I need to highlight that, for example, a Ritualist can create a box that has a passive effect, and dropping the box will heal the player. It's small, it's weird, it seems kind of irrelevant, but they managed, in their limited mechanical framework, to illustrate another culture, which can be equally as functional as the longtime player's expected healer, despite the class using unorthodox abilities and even mechanical clunk, that is, having to handle objects mid-battle. They wove worth and dignity into another region's culture with oddball skills. Just as the fantasy grew more exotic, with spaces that actively challenged the aesthetic set by the core game, player characters evolved to match. Guild Wars Nightfall features the Paragon and Dervish, who don't necessarily do impossibly different things, but they're effectively holy warriors. In fact, Nightfall almost expects the player is using one of these classes. Not mechanically, you're not gated out of progression for playing a Mesmer, for example, but by the time you leave the first major landmass and arrive in a neighboring one, a place your people maintain a tenuous relationship with, you're made to earn the trust of the locals by talking to them and helping them directly, to unlock the ability to advance the quest at all. And this is just slightly different from how story missions unlocked in the first area of Nightfall. There, you only had to prove your worth with good deeds, slaying monsters and helping people, which itself is a step up from the other campaigns which assume you're good enough without proving it. But moving into Korna and acting as a herald of your people, you must verbally build bonds and act on promises made. Spread your name among its people like a shepherd or a prophet to meet the demands of the narrative. You must quite literally become a paragon of the people. So if I hear anyone saying the design is boring, I will ask you to politely reconsider. And I bring this all up because Guild Wars' various expansions have a tendency to depart from the material that built the game. I showed off the beta footage earlier. In another time, Tyria was an amateurish and juvenile copycat. Nothing greater. Guild Wars Prophecies represents a clearer vision for something approaching, a unique take on the fantasy MMO. Humanity's on the back foot, an entire kingdom displaced, its survivors made to settle in historically hostile lands, to unite against a common enemy. Dwarves are present, maybe a lingering remnant of the earliest concept, but no elves or typical fantasy fare otherwise, no goblins, orcs, bugbears, and you can't play as any of that stuff. It wanted to be different, and it originally achieved that with subtraction. The real win was adding tactically. The expansions represent a solidification of identity. Kantha is more or less fantasy East Asia, by which I mean China, Japan, and Korea specifically. It employs a lot of visual signifiers that evoke something resembling Asian fantasy, while tightrope walking between various cultures. Creatures exclusive to choice mythologies are present. This thing is just called Kappa. There's an attempt at Tengu, in name and bird association at least. Enormous mountain walls splashed with red evoke China, while the isolationist foreign policy and starting islands seem to imply Japan. It's a fully mixed bag, including NPC names which tap into all kinds of conventions. And let's not forget the gooch. Fucking sneakers O2. Swapping over to Nightfall, Ilona and Korna draw inspiration from North Africa and particularly Morocco. Most of its architecture pillages from the region, and they even made use of colors found in real-world cities. The expansions are well-liked, and despite rapid-fire release, were important enough to Guild Wars' identity that both Ilona and Kantha had subsequent expansions in the sequel. Tyria is nothing without its many facets. I said that these solidified the game's identity. What I mean is that Guild Wars definitively became world fantasy after these expansions. World fantasy stands apart from traditional fantasy, which so often paints human society in a simplified and allegorical brush, and has an obsession with obscenely inaccurate medieval tavern culture by taking direct inspiration from the real world for aesthetics and social reality of the fiction. Think Valkyrie Profile and Golden Sun. Kantha may have its own culture technically, but any analysis demands a level of consideration for its real-world inspirations. A lot of the Guild Wars aesthetic was shaped by Daniel Dochu, who joined the team after the beta reveal, and the other artists who worked under his supervision. The employed style samples from all cultures indiscriminately, mashing things together until something resembling a fantastical take on a real thing manifests. He previously worked for EA, achieved a master's in industrial design, and won multiple awards for his work, which made such a splash in video games because it stood out. Academic and artistic skill in harmony. In an interview with Building Blog, he more or less described his inspirations, taking care to mention that what he creates architecturally would never work in an academic context, but video games, and fantasy in particular, are an opportunity to experiment because they aren't so thoroughly hampered. You know, academic architectural design has to account for physics, actual principles of engineering, so his art is eclectic and playful, but recognizably human at the same time. It creates a degree of verisimilitude by blurring the line between reality and fiction. You'd swear, walking through some of these spaces, that they'd been snapped by a camera and transposed into polygons. Video games draw people in by allowing for a perverse kind of multidisciplinary interplay. They're inherently playful at an aesthetic level, and that's before getting into the interactive side of the medium at all. I don't know if you could get away with this in other media. There's a sense that culture is being appropriated, but since it's all being thrown into the blender, it's hard to make specific statements. The style feels so Guild Wars because it's so singular. And he's careful to show a degree of intentionality, like he isn't haphazardly trying stuff, but attempting to use real inspirations to create fantastical pastiche. There's a point where he mentions that floating castles are cliché in fantasy, and sure, fair enough. So he chose to make floating mosques, which litter Nightfall's Vabi. It's a small thing, a simple change in expectations, but it also opens a door to unexplored spaces, at least in Western video games. Another of his inspirations is obvious in Cantha, Kowloon the Walled City, a real and largely dismantled place that many pieces of fiction have taken direct inspiration from because it's so alien to look at, stranger than fiction. While some apparently sentient people believe art cannot be political, capturing Kowloon in frame, lifting it from the real world and encoding it in video games has explicit socio-political implications for the fictional world in question, and it isn't subtle. Dochu himself makes it plain that Kaineng City suffers from overpopulation and impossible wealth disparity, and so bandits run the streets. Peasants huddle in darkness, the Ampha and the Jade Brotherhood clash in the alleyways, two powerful guilds that remain undefeated by the Emperor, all while the wealthy live in splendor, or better yet, removed from the conflict on pagodas built on and around spires of rock. In-universe class commentary, carved directly into the game's geography and told through architecture. Many games use their spaces to help tell stories, but Guild Wars Factions and Nightfall made their stories and their context explicit in imagery. Cantha is especially worthy of your time if you're thinking of taking a look, just for the number of uniquely interesting locations, where Xingji Island is fairly comforting and expected, and Kaineng fairly terrifying. These earlier zones are followed by Echovald Forest and the Jade Sea. So, Echovald is home to a couple of different ethnic groups who ultimately act as vassal states to Cantha. The designers then chose to make them unique, and so one of them is apparently Germanic. The continent's a little more diverse than it seemed at first glance. Here, an old-growth forest stretches into the sky, snuffing the light. Only, in-universe, the Jade Wind unleashed by the villain of Guild Wars Factions has turned the organic flora to stone, and the people native to the region adapted by carving into the petrified wood, crafting enormous cathedrals and homes. It's magical and haunting in a completely different way than Kaineng City, and removed from the expected trope dressing generously ladled atop the rest. It fully steps beyond the real world and into the fantastical, but only over the halfway point. The Jade Wind is more or less the searing of Cantha, but instead of being only destructive, we watch the team use a catastrophe as a garden for originality. Apparently, it petrified the ocean itself, crafting impossible depths of raw gemstone. It gleams as you walk over it. Ocean waves stand still, locked in time, and the people have, maybe expectedly, started excavating, mining the jade for profit. Not that that makes economic sense, okay? A sudden glut of a resource does not a lucrative economy make, but shut up, it's fantasy. Factions is a legitimate joy to experience if you can suffer through the stifling visuals of Kaineng and the 1,000 dead monsters it takes to get through. The regions featured in Nightfall also have strong visual direction. The starting zone is enormous. Desert sands patched with greenery and marked with towering structures, monuments to an age of prosperity which ultimately give way to hovels and homes set on the borderlands, great cities across the sea built from stone and eventually floating mosques, gardens, fountains, and incomprehensible wealth. Nightfall is ultimately about preventing a calamity instead of suffering through it. So the focus is less on the innately fantastical but on the profoundly human. Ilona and Korna are made distinct and real, at least as real as it gets for 2006. One of the main antagonists is the de facto military and religious leader of Korna, the people who view you with suspicion, which is why the campaign is delivered slowly and forces you to work with its people, but also spend time in the land. You have to think it's a place worth saving, worth pushing through that derision to make the story hit home. If you fail, the world will become a nightmare hellscape matching the realm of a deposed god, something you catch in glimpses towards the end. When I was much younger, I used to look at non-cartoons like sitcoms and real shows and couldn't imagine why anyone would watch those, which is not reflective of my brain today at all, nor a worthy viewpoint. But you can imagine a certain kind of player who finds all this very boring. Yeah, okay, North Africa splatter canvas, whatever. Unlike a lot of fantasy, these spaces don't need people who love beer and forging, or inventing things and talking quickly, or blood and thunder, or weed jokes.
I killed 2 dwarves in the morning.
They're muted, they're approaching reality. It's less exciting, but more substantive. A host of shards and fragments of lives lived so that no civilization in this world is one single thing. And this isn't just a way to look less reductive when taking direct inspiration from various real-world cultures and smearing them on the page. The original world was also varied. 3 separate kingdoms of men were featured in prophecies alone. And Ascalon is not Kryta, is not Or. Special attention was always paid to painting the people of the world as people. We've already talked about the box art and character models, the way appearances were important to the game, but those ideas alone only account for a fraction of Guild Wars' aesthetic. You may have come across this image before. It's a piece of concept art that's used as a loading screen in pre-searing Ascalon, and it's one of the most famous images associated with the game.
And it was absolutely stunning, and I wanted to play too.
God, I'm so sorry. Guild Wars was different. ArenaNet had a big-time international publisher, but they simply were not equipped to beat Blizzard in a fair fight. And one of the ways they carved their own niche was using artisanal aesthetics, pivoting away from the comic book, hyper people, and the shoulder pads the average player could not bench if they tried. Concept art is used in many of the game's major loading screens, at least in the open world. Individual missions often use raw screenshots, but most of the total screens you encounter are concept art, which isn't actually unique to this game. World of Warcraft did this too, but arguably with less intentionality. Many of WoW's loading screens were symbols, or character art, or monster art. They made use of concept art as well, but critically, the concept art almost always matches the zone, to a T. The drawing with its thick lines is transposed to polygons in a relatively effective way. In keeping with Warcraft's general aesthetic, Blizzard ensured its artists were concepting real places players would go. Guild Wars is a little more challenging to describe. Daniel Dochu, who effectively established the game's aesthetic and oversaw other concept artists on the team, went with a painterly, even impressionist style. It's striking, evocative. They're more poems than places. Looking at Ascalon again, the foliage looks at once photographed and painted. These pieces look like they were created with different tools, which lends an almost mixed media aesthetic to some of these pieces, especially when you compare the foliage in the foreground, which is, again, handled like an impressionist painter might. After the searing, we get the stark red contrasted with the black silhouettes of ruined buildings and harsh sunlight. You know the world is ruined, but you're allowed to sit and stew in the image, fill in the blanks before entering. A lot of the concept art used for loading screens focus on intensity of scale. Puny human figures, barely detailed or blotted into the corners like small, extraneous details in a much larger world. These places have history and you're dust in the wind. I could talk about these forever, but what's important is simple. The world of Guild Wars was aggressively evoked with concept art. You see the art before you ever enter the location, and this is not an uncommon occurrence, to be clear. The first expansion, Guild Wars Factions, has the player leave a small island to see the big city. Loading in, they're met with this. This image was legitimately challenging for me as a young teenager. I loved fantasy, fairy tale, medieval places, and it didn't really matter if it was stylized one way or the other. I loved the starting zone in Factions because it was pretty. Moving into the next major leg of the journey and meeting with this. It's overwhelming. It's stifling. People live here? How? And walking into Kaineng City proper, you suddenly understand why the artist handled it this way. It's a brutal, soul-crushing slog to quest through, no thanks to the density of enemies, of course, but even aesthetically, the world does not exist to serve you. Wonders and whimsy are less likely to be found turning a corner than a blade in the gut. Factions doubles down on what prophecies established. No fanfare, no cataclysmic magical event, just bare human reality. While the game was mechanically stiff, it maintained a degree of visual dignity, making it appear sharper than just about anyone else at the time. Even in the small things. Beyond character creation, armor was a huge deal for Guild Wars. In World of Warcraft, characters would collect various pieces of armor from quests, from vendors, from the auction house, from random enemies, and from dungeons, and so armor was sourced from many places. This kind of gear acquisition almost always results in what's known as a clown suit. An embarrassing series of pickups that clash aesthetically. Red, green, purple, blue, you just look stupid. By contrast, Guild Wars let the player pick some equipment up, but generally speaking, you were intended to craft your own. by salvaging things you found in the field and turning the requisite scrap over to a vendor. Most of the times I got stuck early boiled down to bad gear and forgetting to craft better stuff. And that seemingly innocuous change in player protection resulted in a total aesthetic paradigm shift. The clown suit is funny. The clown suit gets you laughed at. But the clown suit has value. It's a physical record of an adventurer's deeds. In a game like World of Warcraft, where the story is de-emphasized, at least historically, compared to many other MMOs, the player is not truly a character on a page, but a person in the world, adorned with their deeds. Guild Wars is a very different game and isn't a proper MMO the way you'd imagine it to be if you played WoW or like EverQuest. You're never just a person in the world because you're almost always made to feel your relative inconsequentiality. You matter in prophecies, you matter in factions to a lesser extent, and you matter in Nightfall. You're also almost never subjected to a pulsing throng of other players except in towns, like 20 years ago, because the larger world is instanced, and other people are only getting in consensually. And it's felt in the armor. When you craft it, you're given a series of choices for any given part. Here, I'm given 3 different visual designs for a headpiece, for example, but the critical thing is all sets of armor more or less fit together. And with the die system being what it is, for a newcomer, it's whatever you picked when you made your character, your armor always fits. Unless you chose a particularly loud group of colors, you almost always blend into the world like any other NPC. The ones who populate these instant pocket dimensions that you routinely slip into. In Guild Wars 1, just by visually belonging in the world, you were a little bit less of a person than a player character in World of Warcraft. And please don't mistake me, you can create a visual migraine avatar if you want to. Go ahead, I don't even care, but the developers intentionally sought to make their screenshots look less stupid, and in a very small way managed to suck a degree of life out of the thing. It's the kind of choice you'd probably make, from a design perspective, if you were more interested in fidelity and being taken seriously than Blizzard was. I hate censoring World of Warcraft so often, but it's kind of mandatory from a historical perspective because it dominated MMOs so thoroughly. There really isn't a comparison for its crushing influence in any other genre. You don't have control over your colors in most games. One of Guild Wars' defining features, like as a series, is dye. In a world where you cannot be blue, cannot be green, cannot be anything other than human skin tones, you can at least set your colors for free one time and then pay exorbitant fees to collect the correct set of colors for whatever outfit you want. In Guild Wars 1 anyway. The sequel makes a point of offering every known shade the human eye can perceive, from gaudy to gorgeous, and limits them to rewards, bonus gifts, or real money purchases. When you see someone completely disgusting in Guild Wars 2, you don't blame them. You blame the developers for daring to make that common access. I mean, what the hell is this? Yeah, I see you, locking those pale, faded, and otherwise tasteful tones behind playtime, money. You want me to play your game looking like this? I'm sorry, would you ask Mario to stomp Koopas looking like he just left the thrift store? There's something good in the first Guild Wars' refusal to turn the player into a fool, though, and it's related to the expansions. In 2 successive editions, the game rejected the heroic fantasy concept and chose to chase a world fantasy, at least in part. In doing so, Guild Wars made it plain that you are not the main character, and you need all of these other people helping you to do anything, because you're just another person, another part of your party. Your deeds make you a hero, the people you serve make you a hero, and you only had this chance because of those people. You are never going to be the next great tyrant warlock or the ultimate gladiator or whoever, because your existence and value are predicated on your allies, guild or otherwise, which is important to keep in mind for the sequel, which is effectively heroic fantasy, but desperately clings to the idea that while you matter, you're great because other people support you. The soundtrack was handled by Jeremy Sewell, which is why people can't help but say, hey, this sounds like Skyrim, when the truth is, naturally, that Skyrim sounds like Guild Wars. Go steal another game's Valor, milk drinker. Very 23 years old of you. Most of the tracks are effectively ambient pieces, which is what you want from MMO music in the first place, because the instruments rarely get in the way. You aren't working your way through Ascalon while pounding drums and trumpets play on a 3-minute loop, okay? You're basking in the rays of the sun, and the music is made to match. at least the bulk of it. They're arranged and combined so any track ends up sounding something like listening to Aurora Borealis might. Rising, falling, resting, swelling. It's rare that a single instrument stands loudly apart from the others. They still have melodies, but those melodies are muted for the sake of crafting a soundscape, music tailored to fit the world, instead of music that exists in the world, or directs the world. It's part of the aesthetic brilliance that's so commonly appreciated in a comment section, but easy to ignore in the moment because so many of the game's elements work in harmony. The music fits the world, you fit into the world is more innately familiar than other fantasy games, and you're busy rooting out local threats in a rigid mechanical framework, so it all blurs, turns to white noise as you play. Until you die because of some bull-ass shit. While Sewell was ultimately replaced in the sequel by McLean Deemer, alongside a handful of other in-house composers and freelance artists, they didn't attempt to maintain Sewell's work, not really, though old tracks occasionally play in certain areas. And I'm actually glad other composers were allowed to shine. It fits what Guild Wars 2 is doing aesthetically, broadening Tyria, and it seeps into the music. Speaking of the sequel, development finally flagged with the game's final expansion, which stands apart from the previous two in many ways, but especially for acting as a pivot point for the series. Eye of the North is aesthetically interesting as a return, with a greater understanding on ArenaNet's part of what worked visually and what the game was lacking. Players got their world tour in Cantha and Ilona, but eventually they had to come home. Eye of the North covers a lot of ground. It effectively links all the other campaigns with tunnels, and in doing so, globalizes Tyria, or provides narrative context for the world's many cultures to connect easily. It also finally figures out it's fantasy. I said the original campaign was fairly generic, which might be a little unfair, but seriously, it's all disparate groups of humans and, dwarves, and some animal people set in decently realistic environments for a 2005 fantasy game. Eye of the North reintroduces the dwarves, but more importantly adds the Norn and the Asura to the cultural cache, while exploring the Char more thoroughly. This is crucial because most of what Guild Wars has been thus far is humanocentric. And that's fine, it can work, but it's not the most open canvas to paint a splashy, exciting fantasy space, unless I get to play a fucking mole guy. I don't know if I want to play a game full of nearly visually identical people forever. You can't even be overweight in this game. At least vary the body types a little. What is this doll world? The Norn are more or less the highlight. They're on the cover. They're the expected, less visually jarring group because they're just tall people. Descendants of giants who can turn into beasts. Yeah, giant werefolk, whatever. They don't fundamentally clash with what Guild Wars has been thus far because they're still recognizably human, both in appearance and in culture. They're stylized with Norse mythology in mind, at least if the giant blood and architecture are any indication. So, with the Norn as a linchpin, scraping the edge of the fantastical without fully jumping the shark, Guild Wars jumps the shark. The Asura are a technologically advanced species that prefers magic to blades, and manage to fill the nerdy gnome goblin role. They wouldn't end up playable until the sequel, but they're important for offering any color, right? Any spice to something at risk of tasting like plain white bread. And nothing against the Asura, but you have a whole mole race right there. You can be part of the moletariat under Molenin. Why not the socio-political commentary race? I think it might be fun. When the world fantasy gets too real. They tend to prefer warm climates, and their structures are bizarre, geometrical, legitimately hard to square with the castles and mud huts you've seen thus far, but that's the point. They represent yet another way to look at Tyria, another facet. It wouldn't be much of a fantasy if you recognized everything you saw. Cantha would also undergo a period of rapid societal development between this game and the sequel, and the roots are mostly traceable here. The Asura are an open door to science fantasy. Beyond these two groups, Eye of the North's ass end is spent exploring the Char. Originally they were warlike invaders, not much different than orcs with fur. But either due to dissatisfaction with the flatness of their antagonist or a desire to return to the past, you're made to explore 4 full maps of beautiful Char homelands, blackened with soot, smoke, and tempered metal, but still pristine and shining, as if to say, while the Char are different, a little hard to understand, who wants to live in a tin can, they still come from the same world. In fact, these regions are the only regions in the entire game that approach what Old Ascalon was doing visually. Autumn leaves bathed in sunlight, open prairies and tall trees. If not for the char, it'd be just like home. Now you're an invader. You slaughter scores of warbands for your own reasons, but it's hard not to zoom out and see the parallel. To the cubs and the innocent, you've become what you hated, which ultimately serves as the narrative justification for Guild Wars 2, a fresh slate where every race has a seat at the table, where all people and experiences are honored in spite of old wounds, moving past pre-searing once again into an uncertain future. The expansion had a host of important features, but in reality the game started changing way back in Nightfall with heroes. Super henchmen, more or less. Heroes were forever party members you could customize to your liking, whose builds you could alter so they'd function better. NPCs you could actually command so they wouldn't run off and aggro everybody in that stupid Closer to the Stars mission. What a load of shit. Heroes are generally better than henchmen because after that whole Hamstorm fiasco, I don't trust ArenaNet to load up my skill bar. But don't assume they'll fully carry you the way people online like to suggest. As we know, Guild Wars 1 is pretty strictly balanced, and no amount of player customization is likely to break the system outright unless you have access to elite skills and advanced knowledge. A lot of them need to be recruited outside of the core campaign, and in fact, a lot of them are divided amongst the campaigns. You can pick up a bunch for free by following Nightfall's story mode and heading into Eye of the North for the few they hand you outright. It's weird to look back and see the rhetoric surrounding heroes. Everybody uses them, but they're still treated as this game-warping super feature, when in reality, most players of the era blew through whole swaths of the campaigns with friends or strangers. This is Guild Wars, after all, and by the time ArenaNet implemented a solution to make solo play less excruciating, as it tends to be without piles of experience, it was just a dumbing down of their game to one subset of players. I guess the ones they fostered with their box copy. People who probably didn't bash their head on the campaign alone in the first place. Oh, you need a hero? Next you'll tell me go to your doctor for routine physicals. The main valid complaint about heroes is that they detract from the player's need to form parties and real human connections. It's what made the game what it was, only with poor sales in Nightfall and a naturally dwindling population, heroes represent a band-aid solution that future-proofs the game against further population decrease. And it actually got worse than heroes. You could buy mercenary heroes, which effectively replicate your own characters. It's a little hard to explain, easy to exploit with PvP-only characters, and would let you round out your squad with custom, high-performance characters with a one-time purchase from the ArenaNet store. That's right, an early microtransaction. Of course, Blizzard raked in about the same amount of money monthly just for offering the privilege of touching their game. It doesn't feel explicitly evil per se, but it's also a deliberate sale of power to a desperate player. Guild Wars 1 was forward-thinking, but it showed its cracks more than a few times, even way back when. Oh yeah, every enemy is loaded with player skills. Conventional RPG design wisdom dictates that enemies differ meaningfully from players. They're more limited, but there's a lot more of them, in general. It makes sense for a world where trash mobs don't really exist. Like keying into the whole "you're a small person in a world" thing. A bit like Monster Hunter, really. You aren't exceptional except for your utility, which you need party members to round out. You can churn out damage, but if you can't protect yourself, it doesn't matter. It's also kind of funny watching otherwise lesser beings shit out fireballs and counter spells, making your life hell. Of course, this kind of design has a wrinkle. If the developers decide to buff a certain skill for the player, all the monsters would be affected, instantly turning old missions into player wood chippers.
Let me know what you think about our games. We're making these games for you, for our customers. We should know what you think.
Mike! You gotta buff Ritualist, Mike! Mike, my parses! They're kicking me out of the guild, Mike! Michael, please!
It wasn't constant, but it did happen, and it meant that they tried to only tweak the balance in small ways. Cooldown time, energy cost, etc. by glorifying the system and making all potential combatants beholden to those rules. They maybe unintentionally created a world where heroes aren't what they can do, but what they choose to do. This balancing issue became a problem for PvP as well. The two sides of play were adversely affected by sweeping and sudden balance changes until skills were split into PvE and PvP, and balanced separately across each game mode. The skill system is iconic, but it's not a surprise they dropped it for the sequel. We know it created balancing problems, but it also suffered from bloat. Expansions always introduced skills, sometimes mechanical duplicates made to match the flavor of the region. Certain skills weren't even available playing through some campaigns because those classes weren't accessible in said campaign. Ritualists in Alona, for example. But the key thing is, the team ended up juggling a massive, unwieldy system that continued to expand and demanded a lot of developer attention across game modes. This is not to say Guild Wars is poorly designed, but rather that it's a miracle the thing didn't break in more spectacular ways. It does make sense that ArenaNet ultimately chose to pursue New Horizons in the sequel and leave all of its baggage behind. As interesting and unique as those mechanics were, they're a heck of a lot to manage. For as storied as the original game feels, it was only a blip on the radar. 2 years of rapid-fire, overambitious development. It launched so many expansions so quickly, vastly inflated its core concept in service of PvE players. It's not surprising things ended how they did, with a long-form divestment and small pointed updates in the long march to the sequel. Either way, for all its little advancements and features, this X-Pack is a lot of what you've already done, set in sprawling open environments, and really functions as a final act for whichever of your characters. You don't start fresh in Eye of the North and can't actually buy it as a standalone game, like the others. You meet Gwen, who lived and killed like a million billion Shar, where Abaddon in Nightfall was revealed to be responsible for inciting both the Searing and the Jade Wind, and thereby naturally rounded out those campaigns as a sort of trilogy. In Gwen, that's Guild Wars Eye of the North. It's funny, guys. Here you're beating back the sort of generic destroyers, which ends with the player toppling a servant of a dormant elder dragon. Not the dragon, the servant. You're never really moving mountains in Tyria, just sifting through the wreckage, sorting things out, and restoring a tenuous peace. It never betrays the world fantasy concept, not really. Even in its final moments, you're another passing person, a little flame, and you can only do exactly what your mortal body allows. Eye of the North was the end of Guild Wars. It wasn't even particularly subtle. They openly talked about Guild Wars 2 on the box. Your achievements will carry over. In 5 years, I guess. It was an odd game, made for a specific time with a specific design ethos that was never replicated again, and probably because there's no real reason to. If you want Guild Wars, it's still there, running in perpetuity because it's cheap to uphold, but ArenaNet itself was moving on. They demystified their own globe, or at least what they could in that time. They established a clear identity and created new spaces for their fiction to grow. They honored the old, but made it plain in aesthetics and design that Guild Wars was changing, just like it promised from the beginning.
Finally, yeah!
Victory is ours!
Whoa, Ricklock Brimstone!
Now, the journey continues with Guild Wars 2.
Awesome graphics!
The fate of Tyrion is in your hands!
When I was significantly younger and just about as stupid, I once said, when asked what games I wanted to buy a new gaming laptop for, circa 2013, real games like Guild Wars 2. I'm not sure exactly what I meant by that statement. I like Guild Wars 2. A lot, actually, but I only ended up spending an inordinate amount of time in World of Warcraft and Hearthstone that year, and quit my first and only character at level 40 only half of the way to level cap, who I can't bring myself to delete because I put in all that effort. This is a relic, but I can't find the motivation to play him either. So he sits, stuck in frame, exactly the kind of character built by someone who only knows themselves as far as the end of their nose, surrounded by so many new fragments of possibility. The entire sequel concept in a nutshell. There is one human inside of you, and a small alien, and a plant woman, and another plant. This guy too, maybe. This isn't to frame Guild Wars 2 in the negative. The game was successful, especially in its early years and first few expansions, but it didn't immediately stick to me. The launch campaign tapped directly into my dopamine-hungry brain. I remember seeing an early trailer and actually yearning. This is where MMOs are going, I thought, and I was sold instantly. It also landed at a critical juncture, for me at least. World of Warcraft continues to sputter and chug long past its prime from sheer legacy appeal and developer support. You can't shut down the beer store, man. That's a fixture. But by 2013, Mists of Pandaria was starting to drag for some players, and Warlords of Draenor was set to whelm just about everybody in 2014. Guild Wars 2 looked like the future. Player characters who could lash out dynamically, physically cut the way forward through the design hegemony passively installed by Blizzard. Adding to the end of expansion burnout was Hearthstone, another Blizzard game designed to be functionally playable for free if you like playing a warlock, but very receptive to microtransactions for booster packs, alongside fairly frequent expansions. And it became pretty clear to any financially savvy and disaffected player that they were being milked like a cow. Oh, you want to play Warrior Control? That'll be $500.
Okay, now keep feeding me money, and I might let you keep your deck.
And there, just like it was so many years ago, Guild Wars set apart from its competition. No monthly fees, buy once, own forever. So, Guild Wars 2 was fresh. It had interesting ideas. It mechanically replicated an action game while maintaining the bones that made other MMOs popular. It also fully departed from its original framework. Guild Wars 2 might as well have been called Guild Wars New Horizons or Guild Wars New Dawn. What it retains from its ancestor is relevant and even poignant, but the core experience is simply not a sequel to the original Guild Wars. I don't think that's a bad thing. While longtime ArenaNet truthers and nostalgic fans bemoan only having a single scoop of premium chocolate ice cream and not a second one, that scoop of premium chocolate ice cream has not melted. Is this analogy getting old yet? You can play Guild Wars 1 now. The servers are still active and probably will be until the day ArenaNet closes its doors, possibly longer. They remastered the thing at the end of 2024. Kind of. On the other hand, it's not hard to understand where the frustration sprouts from. Guild Wars is kind of punked in the MMO space, completely unreplicated. So to watch the MMO punk turn prep, or something approaching it anyway, probably feels like a bit of a spiritual betrayal to those older fans. You traded in your studded belt and distressed jeans for chinos and golf shirts. How could you hurt me like this? As a recovering World of Warcraft player, I'm not having this problem. Guild Wars 2 was made for me, in a sense. I don't want to fiddle with my abilities forever or figure out the best way to clear this or that mission for too long. I just want my character to function. I would like to stop getting mugged. But more importantly, I go to MMOs explicitly to escape into a world, a place beyond the disappointing and frankly horrifying reality of modern suburban decay, and that's what Guild Wars 2 gives. That and innovation. We talked about the way the series and the world changed as expansions were released. Someone must have figured the game was too humanocentric, so they started expanding their setting while honoring the founding humanity of the series. By the time Guild Wars 2 kicks off, 250 years after the original, to be clear, both Ascalon and Or, two major human civilizations, are dead, with Kryta remaining as the sole bastion of humanity in the core game, before Path of Fire reopened Alona and End of Dragons revised Cantha. That's actually quite a generous time skip because the world itself hardly reflects 2.5 centuries of change, if only because huge swaths of the wilderness remain unsettled. In that time, the Asura and Norn were displaced and moved elsewhere, except one of them made traditional Norn structures, and the others did this.
How big?
The Sylvari, whose birth late-stage Guild Wars players could have witnessed, now have an entire civilization, settled territory, and history in spite of their relative youth. It must have felt a little odd for a game that was exclusively human, or at least in terms of player characters. Dwarves, Asura, Norns, other races adorned the plot but were clearly cast in a lesser role where the fate of the world was concerned, because humans exclusively dealt with Tyria's problems, until Eye of the North ushered heroes from the world's many races into the spotlight. Maybe thinking that humans had to look like fantasy humans, so medieval Europeans, Kryta was altered drastically to suit the new aesthetic. There's an argument that Ascalonians settling in their lands would share their culture, but it's absurd to think their remnants would fully displace Krytan cultural norms, so we're taking it as an aesthetic concession to fill a kind of expectation quota, so the other races of Tyria can nab the spotlight or shine alongside them. And they do. Krita is plunged into political turmoil and dragged into war with vicious centaurs, and so, until the expansions, Guild Wars instantly lost its innate sense of human dominance, which is both intelligent and frustrating in different ways. I'd argue that the world fantasy concept made the game stand out, not just through play, but in visuals, and shuffling that stuff off-screen to focus on the more fantastical feels like a small kind of identity erosion. Not that it wasn't planned or already en route, but there's a sense that Guild Wars 2 is a little embarrassed about its former self, maybe unsure it would speak to people. That or it had no shot of earnestly doing the regions justice on launch and opted to work them in over time, which it did. But the effect remains. In the core game, it's not all about us anymore. It's also particularly funny because human characters, human female characters to be clear, are more popular than other playable characters by an inarguable margin, with the Sylvari, Asura, and Norn sitting around the same middling level of popularity and the Char limping behind. None of this tracks to me. Char are cool. They get the biggest models, which may or not be a problem in some minor contexts, but come on. Check this out, man, this rules!
My daughter likes the Char, so I'll probably end up rolling a Char.
I am gonna play Char.
I would go Char all the way.
It's a Char.
Probably Char.
I'm gonna play as a Char, because I want to be a badass.
Are you a badass?
No.
Well, developers do not always reflect the audience, so. And no, none of the explicit humanoid animal races are playable. No frogs, no moles, no birds. There are in-game justifications for these exclusions. Playable races mostly account for the strongest kingdoms and empires of the world, with the united races working to assist Tyria's more disparate peoples. You might not just be a human, but your role in the world hasn't changed much. Except you seem to have caught me at a very Pacific Salmon point in my life. Any player's journey begins how they might expect coming off more popular games. Multiple playable races, 9 playable classes, you can belong to the world in your way. And your chosen avatar is more important than it was in the original game. Guild Wars 2's advertising made a point of highlighting the importance of the player.
My story.
My story.
My story.
My story is yours.
So after you've created an avatar, you then select from among a series of options to slightly alter your character's story. These include a read on your avatar's personality, worldly affiliations, loosely tying you to the fiction, other minor things, faith, motivations, goals. You're made to roleplay without ever signing up for a roleplay server. Even if your character is named Big Ass, there is no pre-searing Ascalon, no real need to scar the player emotionally. It's a fresh slate for Tyria and a hopeful take on the once browbeaten world. But the tutorial is always dramatic. Whoever you are, and wherever you come from, you'll end up running through a quick introductory level. These establish a local threat, prod you through a truncated series of hoops that resemble open-world play, and end in a gigantic boss battle. These fights aren't hard, but you can find yourself grounded in seconds if you aren't particularly quick with your keyboard and like standing in telegraphed attacks. You have to physically dodge the boss's swings with a roll, performed by double tapping a direction or using a hotkey, all while your character slaps down damage automatically and you contribute the odd strike. You can help fallen friends or call for assistance if you miss your dodge. You're ushered in with the narrative, an introduction to your people and their struggle, but ultimately hooked with the mechanics. Guild Wars 2 isn't like other MMOs. And sure, some other MMOs play like this, or sort of like this, especially nowadays, but we're talking 2013 here, and I'm mostly referring to WoW. It's a fast-paced and aggressive game that actively punishes inaction. In the tutorial, oh, you like standing in fire? You like pissing off your healer because you tunnel too hard on your action bar? Die! In a few short minutes, the game makes its expectations plain, then shuffles you off into the world and says, go. Have at it. Before we get into the world and the game proper, I want to look back at the original just for a moment. Guild Wars was founded on player customization. It can't be overstated. You picked a class, picked a second class, and chose a measly 8 abilities from among that pairing's combined pool. There is a kind of human who cannot perform that kind of decision-making. The sequel removed class mixing entirely, which feels wrong, for lack of a better word. It's more or less what made the game what it was. You weren't picking a warrior-priest hybrid in World of Warcraft. Buddy, that's a paladin. But in Guild Wars, you could. Now, classes seem kind of familiar. warrior, guardian aka paladin, ranger, thief, engineer, elementalist, necromancer, mesmer. The mesmer is one of the only standouts, once again, the only one that isn't just a D&D character. Artificers exist, man. It's not even that weird. Let's look a little closer at the mesmer. None of these are counterspells. The class that effectively sold Guild Wars, made it stand out, isn't actually recognizable at a mechanical level anymore. They're magical duelists, so they summon clones and do all kinds of tricksy nonsense, but you can still pick up a greatsword and fucking whack people. Though, your basic attack isn't a strike like the other classes, and instead a channeled beam. It does not hit that hard, you crock merchants. I don't want to pretend like they're badly realized, because they aren't. It's my favorite class, but they're different, and they leaned into it whenever possible. An elementalist is not a long-range caster the way you'd imagine it, because it's reimagined in the game's action framework. It can fight at range, but it's never going to be Warcraft's mage. Otherwise, they look pretty basic, expected even, but it's important to look at the bigger picture. Guild Wars 1 had this same issue until its expansions, so elite specializations are available for players at max level who've found enough hero points and have an expansion, earned by completing small challenges and collecting them in the world. These specializations reflavor whichever class completely, while selling the Guild Wars aesthetic and fantasy. You can be a plain Jane warrior, or you can be a Canthan Bladesworn, with slow, devastating gunsaber strikes, or a Paragon straight out of Nightfall. You can be a regular Mesmer, or an Elonian Mirage who phases through attacks with ease. Maybe a Virtuoso with an entirely overhauled clone mechanic which manifests as blades that you stockpile to skewer enemies. Elite specializations tend to expand classes in a cultural sense, ground them in the world more thoroughly instead of leaving them entirely plain or interpretable. It's a far cry from dual classing, but gives you a chance to find a fitting style. And you have more options than you might expect. You can play a healing warrior armed with a rifle. I know someone is short-circuiting right now from that cursed string of words. We also have to address armor. I already delivered my clown suit micro essay, and Guild Wars 2 responds to what the original game did by pivoting away from clean sets of mix-matchable armor. You can have a clown suit in minutes. Mere minutes. And don't worry, you can always change the appearance of your equipment, both model and color, in a menu. You don't have to participate in the Clown Fiesta, but you're never not welcome. And that is beautiful. I think it benefits the game. It's definitely an excuse to play more, because Jesus Christ. And with the wardrobe system being what it is, you'll have a physical collection of mementos for the places you've been. Guild Wars 2 asks you to be an active participant in a world, a living person, instead of a pre-designed NPC-adjacent golem. But is it a world worthy of your presence? This modern take on Tyria is open, varied, perpetually discoverable, even alive. You don't talk to stationary people with little exclamation marks floating over their heads. You're meant to level up by finding hearts on the map, regions in need of assistance, and lending a hand in that specific place with whatever task. These are meant to be real places in the world with actual problems, which might sound trite and obvious, but consider that so much of how people had previously experienced MMOs was through enormous text scrolls and context clues alone. Here, we're helping cut down on invading pests for the sake of a farmer, or helping train recruits for local defense. They're not resonant, mind-blowing stories, they're just ambient happenings in a world you're meant to believe in. You start small, assisting regular people with simple tasks, and eventually wind up performing heroic feats or broaching other dimensions. I should be clear that the gravity of these hearts does not scale in a linear fashion. I walked into a max-level piece of add-on material and got asked to help test soup. One of the new expansions has you cooking for locals. And yeah, it's cute or wholesome chungus or whatever, but the point is clear. Wherever you go, and whatever you do, you're acting to help the people of Tyria, from Kryta to Cantha. And this is important for the sake of the narrative. You are one of the most important people in the world, for extremely explicit reasons, but you never rise so high that you're automatically above the people you encounter. You're never too good for the world. A hero in Tyria is someone who cares about Tyria, just like it's always been. I love the heart system because it recontextualizes MMO questing. You don't gather 15 pelts with a shitty drop rate, you help someone with something that feels real, or at least kind of substantive, because you can see the problem. And you're never forced to do one single task. A heart might ask the player to do something small and fiddly, like examine my lobster traps, or whatever. But at the same time, you'll be allowed to thin the local monster population for a steady point increase. There's always a secondary or tertiary task to accompany whatever the main expectation is. And that's important. You can flail around, mashing buttons, killing whatever, and though it's inefficient, it usually works. But if you want to wrap the thing quickly and be as helpful as possible narratively, you have to listen to what the NPCs want and deliver. You have to engage. It's not necessary to complete every little task you come across. You can, and there are rewards for completionists who feel like plumbing the depths of every cave and filling every heart, but Guild Wars 2 is designed in a way that wraps you up and carries you along naturally. The open world is riddled with little events that pop up or physically pass through the area, protecting a caravan or defeating some terrible monster, and these tasks usually take time or effort, so they don't disappear in a blink because some uber-powerful player is running through old zones. In fact, the events often evolve if you stick with them, starting out as one objective and turning into another, because these events aren't random encounters, but contextually relevant to the story of whatever area you're adventuring through. Whether or not you care about the story, it's coming one way or another. Here comes the airplane! Turn your head and it'll smear on your cheek, open up! Guild Wars 2 is not as played as it was, but even so, the world feels more alive, abandoned, than the typical map in World of Warcraft, partially because it's free now. There's really no reason not to poke around here for a laugh, and especially with friends. Partially because old zones can still be meaningfully rewarding. Northrend is a ghost town, which is not true of any of Guild Wars' expansions. Guild Wars 2 isn't shocking by today's standards, and even still, the work it did to enliven the world is felt and plainly visible. These spaces are also more than their hearts and events. The maps are dotted with vistas that you can interact with for a quick view of the land and some experience. Sometimes an NPC just wants you to beat the shit out of him for points. He's just into that, okay? The game has jumping puzzles. Yeah, it leverages its unique mechanics, not jumping, but the way momentum works in-game, by tacking platforming onto the regular gameplay, with little treasures for successful players. You don't have to engage with the world, but you have every reason to. Speaking of, you don't actually have to play in any particular way to level up in Guild Wars 2. This is more pronounced in the modern era. It was harder to level up in earlier days, but with so many expansions, the game has moved beyond its core world and most play is found in those spaces instead. Not that the core maps are abandoned, just that the focus is elsewhere now. Regardless, if you so desire, you can train a crafting skill. You can be a laborer and get experience from it. You can wander around, taking in the sights and waltzing on through multiple zones to level up if you're feeling less bloodthirsty. It's an impressive dynamic because so many MMOs need you to do the thing. You've got to do the thing, and if you don't, and do it a lot, usually 10 to 15 times per, you're not getting a reward. Other MMOs make play a job, and there's worth in telling the player to get a job. Someone's got to fork over your monthly paycheck, but Guild Wars doesn't demand much, except engagement. An explorer is a worthy kind of person. A crafter is a worthy kind of person. So why not grant experience? It's not like you can tap into either of these to reach max level alone, or if you can, it's not particularly quick. The game takes the pressure off in a lot of small ways. Maybe it's excessively modern. Maybe it's disturbingly kind. I'm not sure. But it's very hard to hate. A few of the maps also feature world bosses, which are so smart, because now any new player waddling by will occasionally see an enormous horde of players waiting for the thing to spawn, or catch a glimpse of a raid boss monster in, a baby zone. They can jump in, they'll probably die, but they get to rip that band-aid off early. Oh yeah, I'm small and I suck, but wait, if I group up with these people and get a little stronger, maybe I won't suck. MMOs struggle with creating a meaningful sense of danger, at least when the player is far removed from whatever zone's level requirements. But Guild Wars caps players at set thresholds when they re-enter old zones, putting them on a comparable level with that area's challenges. And you're not completely stripped down, you still have your full moveset, your elite specialization, and your advanced equipment, but your stats are reduced regardless. You're never perfectly siphon the world. You know, you log out in other games with low-level enemies attacking you and never die. Boy, I wish I would die for disrespecting the world at a fundamental level, but here, you actually have to acknowledge the world to some degree. The environments are also meant to be semi-believable, so rivers and lakes suddenly matter. In the original, you were allowed to ford shallow waters, or else you were fully walled off.
I'm working on currently the pathing to make sure that the character is able to traverse through the map without getting hung up on things.
See that? That's her fault. But there's a world to save and no time for a dip. Here in the sequel, water is a whole second kind of play that you could dive into, pun not just intended, but zoop through your midriff with a sawn-off shotgun. Swimming implies diving, so maybe you take the plunge and suddenly discover an entire rendered area under the zone you were just questing through. Your entire moveset changes, and if you look at your character panel, you have water-specific equipment, including some gear to breathe in perpetuity. Guild Wars 2 wants you swimming. Why they want this, I do not know. I have whole characters with unupgraded water gear. I can count the number of times I had to swim for the sake of a major quest on one hand. Is there an elite specialization that's water-focused? That you use in the water? Why? Introducing the swimmer elite spec. He'll never stop, even when it's completely inappropriate. More or less the same, except he's swimming. It's the kind of thing you have to applaud, because functionally there's almost no real play utility in this. Occasionally an event asks you to dive or thin the local fish population, whatever the case. You only ever go swimming on request, and rarely for fun. Which is unfortunate because sometimes you'll find something incredible at pieces of the ancient world. Guild Wars 1, hidden there below the surface. Part of what got me to quit the other game is realizing that during every expansion I'd end up doing the same things forever. I'll walk you through it. New expansion drops, old gear is bad, reach the new level cap, get better gear, go play PvP. And that never changed. The backdrops got increasingly high fidelity and the plot kept moving, but I was always there, playing catch-up to something that deliberately left me behind, and especially with alternate characters. If you like playing PvP in that other game, you know the pain of having multiple avatars and having to run the same boring material for actual hours to earn a character who isn't actually prepared by that point to compete in PvP. It's an enormous ask, and an incredible time sink unless your evenings are exclusively reserved for that game. And I could not do that anymore. It didn't fit my life. Guild Wars doesn't work like that. Admittedly, this design quirk goes back to the original game. They like to call it horizontal progression. You aren't climbing a ladder because you're mostly already where you need to be. You'd earn powerful, more optimal gear, but you didn't need it to function. Most of the draw was fashion and prestige. In this world, you progress in ways that elevate the core experience but are not necessary to enjoy the core experience, which is a hell of a design challenge. Make the game cooler, but give people the option to ignore new features entirely. I guess it's kind of like crafting the soundscape of a video that only benefits headphone users when 2/3 of people use their phones or their TV. We saw this in Guild Wars. Plenty of rewards at the highest level were purely cosmetic. It's crucial for removing the passive hierarchy vertical progression creates. Oh, we gotta bring Jerry to the raid. He's got the best gear. He does the most damage. We can't lose Jerry. Fuck Jerry. Jerry is an asshole and has too much time on his hands, and it isn't fair. Why don't you have responsibilities, Jerry? Why are you free, Jerry? But are you really free, Jerry? Aren't you just as trapped in this virtual world as anyone with a mortgage and children? Or is that what you're running away from? Vertical progression was notably frustrating in the PvP context, in that other game, because gear affected play to such a degree that an ungeared character simply did not have the ability to flex skill, at least against anyone who also had that, because you were too busy exploding. Gear was so important, it defined your ability first. Guild Wars saw that dynamic, accurately called it toxic, and challenged it long before WoW ever bothered to bring PvPers up to a baseline stat value if they lacked gear to keep them at least semi-useful. All the way back in 2005. By 2013, in Guild Wars 2, ArenaNet unleashed a vision of a world where real human people with rich, multifaceted interior lives weren't immediately cast as digital second-class citizens. Most of what you're working towards is purely aesthetic, and if it's not, it's like mild utility stuff, with the added qualifier that, hopefully, you're actually enjoying your time playing the game instead of simply going through the motions. Horizontal progression as a concept also ties into the story, and the expansions. You made a series of choices when you created your character, namely the role-playing ones, and those influence your character's personal story. Every created character, depending on their aforementioned choices, goes through the core game a little differently. You are a person in the world. This is your story. Guild Wars 2 is pretty big on its plot, with recurring characters, piles and piles of voiced dialogue, highly memorable scenes, at least in some of the campaigns, and again, unlike another game, makes it all a priority, but leaves it optional. The events of the narrative all assume that you've engaged with the story, which might prompt the player to take the time. The story missions help level you up, almost function like you're playing Guild Wars again, and give other assorted rewards, but you don't have to play through them if you don't want to. It's neatly divided from the world and greenlit through a menu, which will direct you via letter to whatever new branch when you're at the appropriate level. I don't want to pretend that the story is mind-blowing stuff. The truth is, a lot of the early plot is relatively trite because you're a young adventurer and the stakes aren't quite high enough to justify deeply impactful material. Early in the human campaign, if you picked that you wanted to go to clown college as a kid, you end up fighting carnies, killing clowns, and
It even explodes on command. All I have to say is, bomb, go boom.
This is really funny, but Guild Wars is a game about sweeping existential threats to the world. A little later on, at level 30, you can infiltrate a pirate camp by dressing up as a pirate, and everyone talks like a pirate, in the non-historical tropey way, and then you drink a lot of alcohol. Oh cool, same. Stuff like this, and a load of quirky Joss Whedonisms complicate something that can genuinely spark emotions. I have been touched by Guild Wars 2. And I'm not seeking damages, but like I said, it's largely optional anyway. Eventually, the player character becomes the Pact Commander, a person who effectively unites the playable races in defense of Tyria. And this title follows you into the expansions, where you once again act like the player character in Guild Wars Nightfall, heading into Korna. You're an ambassador to the world, working for its varied people alongside its varied people. Plot-relevant characters might nab the spotlight, but it doesn't feel like, for example, Illidan sweeping into the plot and acting like the main character, putting down the almighty Titan Sargeras while you sit back and watch. You're on the front lines, shoulder to shoulder with the world's heroes, and more worthwhile in combat than any of them, or most of them. And the game uses this dynamic to make losses so much more impactful. You might have been able to save that character if you were stronger, but in the end, you're just one person. And they weren't built like you. You can't save everybody. So if the zones can be kind of ignored and the story can be actively ignored, how much of Guild Wars 2 is actually meant to be played? What's the core proposition here? The first game wasn't really about its environments. They were backdrops that contextualized all that butchering. And while story was shoved into your face, you were originally intended to leave, jump into a battleground, and fight. Combat is the major through line across entries, especially because these games are so nerdy and generally ignored. Guild Wars 2 is ultimately about racking up passive damage from auto attacks, like many other MMOs, and using cooldown abilities strategically. It looks like proper action and maybe even overly simplistic, but there's an innate skill check built into this system. Your auto attack replacement is usually a combination attack, progressing from one move in the chain to the next before resetting and repeating. There are exceptions to this dynamic, but those classes tend to be focused on range damage anyway. Melee players will have to give their auto attack chains space to fully complete for maximum damage. You don't simply face roll the keys and let your auto attacks happen. You have to weave them together in ways that give the most uptime for your strongest cooldown skills, while continuously landing the final attack in a chain, which tends to hit hardest. I know, hey man, who cares? I don't know. Imagine a team solving a perpetual and obnoxious feature of MMO design and never getting their flowers for it. Oh, that's all these games do? That's all they ever do? Yeah, boring, right? The system, once again, demands some level of engagement from the player. You aren't rewarded for mashing away, but the beautiful simplicity of the presentation implies ease of use at the baseline. It's inviting, not overwhelming, but privileges intentionality. Your hotbar skills are not chosen. You simply equip a weapon and have skills. This is not an exaggeration in case you've managed to ignore Guild Wars 2 all this time. If you pick up a sword, you now have 3 sword skills. If you pick up a torch in your offhand, you have 2 additional torch skills. If you equip a 2-handed greatsword, you instead have 5 greatsword skills. You can carry 2 weapon sets at any time and swap mid-battle. Those abilities are the core of your character. In a sense, you are what you wield. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that isn't the full extent of your character. It is not a 5-10-button game. You have additional abilities that rest on a separate bar above the main bar, general class or specialization-specific abilities, which is why my default Mesmer only has various ways to shatter his clones, while my Virtuoso Mesmer sends out his conjured blades in different formations. And my Hollowsmith Engineer has a whole pile of utility skills. Guild Wars 2 is visibly more kinetic, energetic, impactful than the original could ever feel, and while a lot of that is simple smoke and mirrors, including hefty screen shake, sorry motion sickness sufferers, combat is both active and reactive. A number of weapons are affixed with block or counter skills that ground you in the mechanical reality, where the original felt flaccid, the way World of Warcraft and SWTOR and even Dragon Age feel flaccid. Guild Wars 2 avoids MMO impotency by making you an entity with a real hitbox, with physics, momentum, the ability to block projectiles, and its relatively simple technology. I don't think MMOs are quite ready for full-scale individual projectile collision if Camelot Unchained is any indication, so what's here is fairly impressive for the era. And besides your weapon skills and your class skills, you have a handful of utility skills to the right. These aren't static like your other moves. You're allowed to choose from an extensive drop-down menu, including skills you receive for choosing whatever particular race, inherently granted class utility skills, and any other abilities related to your specialization. It's streamlined in a sense. Most warriors are gonna do the same thing. Build up a bar and drop a fat crit. It's not particularly expressive unless you really understand the systems and finagle something weird out of them. For the most part, characters are either power-focused, condition-focused, or support-focused. That is, you're either bopping them on the head, riddling them with ailments, or helping people while swinging away. It's a little hard to describe because, yes, any class, any character can technically do anything. That doesn't mean they'll do it particularly well, but it's not like taking a squishy priest into the front lines and exploding like in World of Warcraft. You can very competently dish out heals as a warrior. It's just contextualized a little differently and locked by particular stats. Set your shouts to grant healing. You can just do that. Okay, you're healed now, and it's probably the biggest hurdle for newer players because they tend to expect a degree of role adherence or more obvious flat buffs like in WoW. There, a druid will give their allies Mark of the Wild. Here, the rogue can provide alacrity, but so can a range of other classes. Every profession has support utilities and healing options. Nobody picks a healer to deal big damage in other games, but in Guild Wars 2 you can construct a build to suit any particular role as long as you have the right weapon and the right investment. There's another complication. Every weapon is handled differently by the various classes. So a torch is one thing to a berserker and something very different to a firebrand, which is even further complicated by a later expansion optionally opening up all possible elite spec only weapons to all of a class's specializations, which works to condense builds in the upper echelons of play but massively expands possibilities for casual players. Beginners won't bother reading into their armor stats or their traits or whatever. They'll just hit stuff and move on. And that works for a long time, but the truth is, not unlike the original game, knowledge and skill are the primary measures of player ability more than raw execution, though that plays its own part as well. It may look dumbed down or whatever terminally upset people might think, but I imagine based on a little experience that they'd struggle to learn the game's intricacies without real effort, and certainly no less than Guild Wars 1. You know, people like to jerk off about my build that totally crushed the game, and it's just a boring Necromancer set they pulled off the internet. Or like the established meta build predetermined by the hardest core players. I think that's what interests me most about Guild Wars 2. On its face, it's a fairly ooga booga me smash type game, but take a single glance under the hood, and you'll find a festering pile of numerical nonsense to unpack, not because selecting one of 3 traits per tier is incredibly challenging, but because figuring out how to optimize these systems to make your relatively simple action combat effective isn't always as easy as you think. Mind you, class selection is highly relevant to how challenging the game ends up feeling. If you pick up a Guardian, a Ranger, a Necromancer, all of which sit neatly at the top of the player popularity chart, by the way, you are not going to struggle. These classes account for the greatest number of, quote, mains that players use because they're simple and effective. They should almost never die. This is not an exaggeration. The Mesmer is significantly more obnoxious to keep alive because of a naturally lower health pool, fewer quality ways to heal, DPS that can be challenging to keep rolling if you're new, just a host of small factors that add up to a bigger problem. Smash cut to my Guardian, whose elite specialization I just picked up 5 seconds ago. And I literally cannot die unless I stop hitting buttons. I don't know my buttons. I am hitting anything whenever I feel like it, whenever it's off cooldown, but I cannot die. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Some classes struggle where others succeed, because the game is not as simple as spamming moves and dodging correctly. You have to engage your utility skills, you have to use your class-specific tricks correctly, at least if you play some of the more fragile classes. I have to applaud the team for including the simpler classes and then choosing to complicate them massively with elite specializations. I adore that the base warrior is so simple, but the base elementalist will legitimately challenge players to access 4 different elements, which each reload your skill bar with a different set of moves. Her weapon. Holy shit! And the engineer isn't overly complex in its core moves, but it's got so many gadgets and options baked into its secondary bars, you could spend days getting a feel for the thing. Guild Wars 2 may be slightly streamlined, but only if you don't go looking. Guild Wars 1 is not physically challenging to perform. This is demented. I like that combat uses visual indicators for big incoming attacks. You know, it was designed to be readable, and not require add-on support like World of Warcraft historically assumed. That is, until a massive ball of players is bunched up in a single space slinging spells, tanking the frame rate and obscuring markers. It's the kind of crack that only really affects people handling high-end PvE material, but it's present regardless. And it's a shame because the game's animations are gorgeous, spell effects are flashy and eye-catching. They make you feel like a hero, only you're incentivized to tap into the menu options to dampen everyone else's shine for the sake of your own play experience. Graphic design is a good thing. That streamlined kind of aesthetic bugs some people, but for the most part it makes for clean visuals. The problem in Guild Wars 2, though, is I can't tell what any enemy is inflicted with at a glance, or what my buffs are because they're tiny. Important game mechanics for certain classes that require active juggling can slip your mind because they fade into this array. Oh fun, they're moving. It is legitimately easier to find your favorite flavor of canned tuna in a grocery aisle. Minimalism is not always the answer. This is actually a pretty common issue in YouTube thumbnails and a great lesson for anyone interested in graphics. You want to shrink the final product to like 20% or so? See if anyone can tell what it is. There's a good few issues with Guild Wars 2, from the new player experience to the absolute nightmare your inventory becomes. I like playing the game and tend to ignore my bags because they make me want to scream. But I think I made it clear in the first segment that the original game has its own issues, and these little things don't take away from the broader picture. Games are so much more than their minutiae. Truly great games always have bullshit. That's why they're good. It's more a question of what kinds of bullshit you can stomach, and why. Defensively speaking, you're limited to whatever your class has tucked away in their back pocket, any universal dodge roll otherwise. You have 2 rolls stocked before your character needs a break. They refill over time. And the developers are keenly aware of this, often allowing players to carefully duck brutal attacks, but punishing them for excessive use in harder challenges. As always, some classes can circumvent skill checks. Mirage Mesmers, and particularly with a staff build, get so much dodge power it'd be impressive for them to fail. Guardians and Necromancers have so much armor and raw sustain they shouldn't suffer at all. There's a character for you in Guild Wars 2. Not everyone finds it, but it's there. Over 10 years ago now, I started a thief, thinking, wow, that's me! That's who I am! And now I look at my wildly Broadway plant guy with his purple suit and illusions and know for a stone-cold fact that that is me. I just didn't know it then. There's a lot more systemic minutia involving stat optimization, but that stuff accounts for such a small percentage of a character's total power, and involves fiddling with armor, buying trinkets, and other small boosters that'd bore you to tears. But what I want to make plain is that Guild Wars 2 is not World of Warcraft 2. It shares a few similarities and functions in a few expected ways, but at its core, it's still wholly unique. I wanted to write this entire video without mentioning WoW at all, for the sake of respect, but it's more or less unavoidable, considering ArenaNet's history, considering the landscape Guild Wars was founded in, considering that it historically existed as a competitive alternative. And even so, living in the shadow of a monster, Guild Wars 2 carries fragments of its older self into New Horizons. It's a game that ultimately responds both to World of Warcraft and to itself. I want to talk about the Revenant class for a bit. Guild Wars 2 has existed for over a decade, and in that time, only one additional class was added to the game. This guy. It's a heavy armor class, kind of draped with a sinister energy, something that kind of evokes the Death Knight from WoW. Not really, but you know. They've got the regular warrior and the holy warrior, so they need something, quirky for the third. The Revenant's a little out there. They're usually accused of being edgy for having blindfolds and katanas in the promotional art.
Okay, you know what?
But what a Revenant actually is a person who channels historical figures from the mists. It's an in-universe term that the wiki describes as a primordial proto-reality, but you're basically invoking the dead. So the Revenant calls upon historical figures from the mists to aid them in combat, which is an incredibly powerful concept. You aren't summoning legends from this game, you're invoking the names of people from the original Guild Wars. It's like watching a company acknowledge and honor its past in gameplay, even in a small way. I've already explained the open world, and it should be clear that the game wants its players sifting through them, but you'll also notice that I've included a lot of shots of my dragon or a skyscale. Mounts are a huge point of contention in MMOs, or at least World of Warcraft. They were implemented way back when, without much thought beyond player convenience, and fundamentally warped traversal. While no instantaneous fast travel system existed in World of Warcraft, and does in both Guild Wars games, the fact is, once you've got a flying mount, you have no reason to be a filthy groundwalker ever again. Yeah, scurry like the insects you are, groundies. The original Guild Wars had no need for mounts. Well, like you could use speed boost abilities to run real fast, but the design catered towards monster mowing mission play and never really had a proper open world, so no mounts. Guild Wars 2 has an open world, but deliberately ignored mounts until the entire second expansion, which is actually pretty important. It means players were engaging with the core experience as intended, and couldn't really complain because they could pay an insignificant fee to teleport anywhere they'd been at any time. It was an elegant little solution that honored the design. The Heart of Thorns expansion doubled down by not only ignoring mounts, but additionally dropping the player in these dizzying environments. Truly vertical level design. These were mind-bending at the time. It might sound a little weird looking back, and especially if you aren't playing through the expansions in release order, but Heart of Thorns was a real triumph in terms of level design, forcing the player to actually navigate twisting mountains, rope-suspended villages, tight caves, and impossible depths, and all without a flying mount, in a world that could kill you. Now, you could put the effort in, raising your mastery rank to unlock the ability to glide, and even take advantage of updrafts to make navigation easier if you continued to invest, but even still, you were a puny mortal in a world much bigger than you, which hammered the narrative conceit of the expansion into your brain. You were grappling with an unexpected threat, in an unfamiliar land, far beyond your individual power. Of course, old-school Guild Wars players were familiar with Maguma Jungle, but not like this. It was always vertical, but it was never so overwhelming. You're forced to contend with the towering weight of history at the same time as it rapidly morphs before your eyes. In the same expansion that unlocked the Revenant class, the one that grappled with history to fight. This is the Guild Wars 2 promise. It was never going to be its previous self, but it compensated for that fact where possible. Bigger, better things, new horizons, filtered through a familiar lens. And because it was elegantly designed with horizontal progression in mind, you can go back to Heart of Thorns now and engage with that old material to unlock the glider, and upgrade it as you see fit by spending more time. It won't give you an enormous advantage, but it will give you something. Other players do still load in to run through various meta events, that is, the ambient unfolding story of the region, for its rewards. To this day. I don't want to break down the entire context, but there will always be a legitimate purpose in heading back to older material. You never level out of it. Never level out of it. I guess that still bugs me. How very old fans despise this game. The old one's still there. Heart of Thorn's design aspirations are complicated by the existence of mounts, introduced in the Path of Fire expansion. Or would be if this were some other fucking game. Mounts don't erase the need to explore the world, or even erase geography. In fact, they were designed specifically with geography in mind and drip-fed exclusively to an invested player. The first is the Raptor, which can move slightly faster than a walking character, only really useful because maps are physically larger than they once were. Please don't fact-check this claim. I have not determined if the zones are legitimately larger than the ones in Guild Wars 1, and if you say anything, I'll just scream that old Guild Wars has no Z-axis. The Raptor can jump long distances, something you can upgrade over time. Until you unlock the Sky Scale, the Raptor is effectively the best option for quick traversal, but critically, it doesn't offer much more than a light speed boost on a cooldown. Long jumping is incredibly niche, even if some of the maps are designed to allow for it, so the jump ends up being a short rocket boost you casually click for a hit of dopamine. Have you noticed nothing hits hard after 30? This is why I played Nobunaga's Ambition. Next is the Rabbit. Unlike the Raptor, it's slow, or by comparison anyway, and only really used to scale vertical environments with a powerful high jump that, again, you need to upgrade to reach its true potential. Actually, unlike most mounts, it encourages exploration by giving the player a tool to scale what was previously inaccessible, and even with its strengths, still doesn't invalidate the core construction of Heart of Thorn's environments. You still have to mind enemies and you still can't scale everything freely. A mount that gets you out into the world. Now, all of the Guild Wars mounts do this, but the Rabbit in particular, early on, opens things up massively. For water travel or quicksand in the desert, you need a skimmer. Previously, water was always a bit of a hurdle. You could always swim on through, sometimes harassed by angry fish, I guess, but there was no quick or easy crossing option. You had to rough it and try to remember what your weird, aquatic-only moveset did, awkwardly mashing and flailing until the notably angry tuna or whatever finally died. The skimmer lets you skip over water, moving faster on liquid surfaces and reverting to a slower drift on land. Once again, it's deliberately designed with the world in mind. And you'll die, actually die, trying to slog through quicksand without one. It's actually necessary to use the skimmer at certain points. It can also dive and make underwater traversal a breeze, but I haven't unlocked that mastery yet. You get out of the game what you put in. These are the core mounts that just about everyone will access because the others are far harder to unlock, or too niche. The Jackal, for example, is quick enough, a little stiff, but highly useful for map completion. The Jackal alone makes use of sand portals that grant passage to new places, which you pass throughout the expansion but can't access till you've seen almost everything once. It's an invitation to explore when you think you've seen it all. And then there's the Ball. The Roller Beetle is the pinnacle of fiction, and the fastest overland mount, in a game that has very little need for the fastest overland mount. It also has unique mechanics and physics that make it challenging to master, involving momentum and elevation, but still, skillful use will let you move so fast you can skip over the water like a stone. And I figure most players either never unlock it or never put in that effort, but if you do engage with the game and do learn the world so thoroughly you know how to swerve through the geography and maintain momentum, you can race through the map in minutes. They built physics into their mount to make it a challenge, to make it fun. That more or less describes the ethos for the game's most exceptional mounts. The Skyscale and the Griffin are harder to unlock than any other. I mean, the Beetle's a pain in the ass. It took me 3 days of running around and consulting a guide, but the others take some time, like you might expect. Guild Wars 2 has existed for that long, apparently, so now the Skyscale can be acquired in a couple of ways. The normal and very long way via Path of Fire, or the truncated route in Secrets of the Obscure, a smaller, later expansion. The faster route is not lightning quick, and requires an actual commitment to the task. I picked it up 1 month and fully put it down until I could make more time for myself. To be clear, I have not unlocked the Griffin and really wish I did, but it would have taken an enormous time investment that I simply can't give at this point. But you get what you put in. The Skyscale is such a strong take on a flying mount because it never invalidates the ground. You aren't granted infinite airtime, or rather, you have to grapple with your Skyscale's energy. Eventually you'll burn it out and start sagging in the air, begging for a refill easily attained by dropping to the ground. You have a pair of recharging dashes, kind of like the dodge roll system, which give a little speed boost but cost energy. You can unlock the ability to mount mid-air, cling to walls, and even boost off the walls, consuming one of those charges, but you're never allowed to freely break the Z-axis over your knee and dominate the world. So you land on the terrain, navigate through its lilts and grooves, you take flight, and soar through the air, carefully scale mountains, and keep going. Once you have it, you never want to stop riding it, but you never fully eject yourself from the world. It's incredibly intelligent design. It's also contextualized as a thing you raised since infancy. You have to get to know it before you can ride it. And even when you have early access to the thing, before fully unlocking it, the Skyscale has a learning curve. You're never not made to grapple with the game, and that's part of why I love what they've done. So much of the experience is crafted with an awareness for design pitfalls. The Griffin is similar, capable of turning flight into art, but limited by height, by skillful use of its mechanics, and it's targeted, not universal application. It's a kingly reward for sticking things out. In fact, Guild Wars 2's design was so good, World of Warcraft stole it.
Dragon riding uses a momentum-based system to keep mounts in the air. Once airborne, dive quickly to accelerate and reach maximum speed.
This is not subtle. Compare Dragonflight to Griffin riding. Chuck the spin animation from Skyscales on a Griffin, and that's dragon riding, more or less. The inspiration could not be more apparent. And it only exists as an alternative form of riding that avoids the design issues inherent to regular flying mounts. This is why WoW is an inextricable part of the conversation. As the majority power holder, they looked over ArenaNet's shoulder and swiped their design. Unapologetically, and sure, it fixes a design problem in WoW, uplifts the experience, it's for the best. And there is Guild Wars 2, just a WoW clone, informing their design team. Guild Wars has a strong core base that's wavered over time. Very few things are forever, and that's no one's fault. But the games were so ahead of their time, so routinely because they were forced to adapt early, find ways to succeed in a stifling market.
The idea is when we look at what are the player problems in the industry, what are the frustrations in the genre that players have, what are the opportunity spaces where there are things that we could solve for, that if we could solve those complex problems, that players would feel like games were more approachable, the genre was a better genre to play in.
Praying that good design would speak to players, which is hopeful at best. Disney stopped doing hand-animated works, and people still follow them regardless because they do what they do, serve who they serve. And they're too big to simply fail. They have critical wiggle room, like Blizzard does, and ArenaNet doesn't. It's a frustrating position to be in, doing what you can to survive and continuing on even when you stumble, while your competitor just steamrolls on, unassailable and impervious. Interestingly enough, Path of Fire, the second expansion, was also the last to add game-altering mechanics. Yes, every expansion after shipped with something new. You can get a turtle mount in Cantha and a skiff. For a different kind of water travel, Secrets of the Obscure introduced a host of little things. Janther brought player housing and, spears. The most common weapon of the ancient world, finally here for all to thrust! And Visions of Eternity upgraded the skimmer in a couple of ways, but the core of play did not change significantly ever again. And it's probably for the best. After a point, and not unlike Guild Wars 1, the more you add, the more you take away, or at least, the more of the core you dilute. If anything, the post-Path of Fire expansions mostly tap into the places you visit, selling the culture, the flavor of those locales, confident that if you already like the core experience, you'll enjoy the regional flavors too. This MMO is fully aware of how it's positioned in the broader landscape, aware of its history. It isn't selling these full retail price expansions to act as replacements for the current paradigm, but as optional add-ons for relatively cheap. They go on sale frequently, and usually for around $20. Imagine getting the entirety of Path of Fire, its mounts, its environments and story, and all of it for the cost of a Wendy's meal. It isn't really any different than the old days. Competitively priced expansions are how I got into Guild Wars in the first place. This is not to write hagiography for Guild Wars. The way expansions were handled actually has a fragmenting effect on the player base, wherein WoW, a new X-Pack means you're coming along or getting left behind. Guild Wars leaves it optional. It's almost too honest for its own good, and especially in this kind of market. Blizzard pushed for microtransactions and made a killing, so why not ArenaNet? The game has plenty of modern features that partially circumvent the design or otherwise beg you to open your wallet. Max-level character boosters are available for purchase, and you even get one for every bot expansion, meaning you can fully ignore the core game if you like. Elite specializations can be a pain in the ass to unlock when you just want to see what they're about, especially when they're far more evocative and interesting than, like, Guardian. You've got to hop on a, quote, hero point train that's... If you're a new player, you're probably not going to know how to do that, despite really, really wanting a gun saber or something, so you're incentivized to skip the entire process and waiting time and hero point hunting with the sky scale you don't have because it takes time in a guide, by heading to the store and buying enough hero point scrolls that you can instantly start playing the spec you want. It's not a ton of money, but the temptation is there, and like a typical MMO, Guild Wars 2 opens a lot of different streams that ultimately flow into ArenaNet's bank account. Cosmetics used to be earned outside of a handful, but the real money shop is absolutely brimming today. Of course, you can avoid shelling out if you earn enough gold in-game and exchange it for gems. You can earn things from the shop with effort. But real money shops aren't really designed for those kinds of players in the first place. Not to paint ArenaNet as miserly corporate fat cats, it's a business beholden to investors, and they're going to aggressively monetize wherever possible to stay afloat, instead of being stuck on life support, which is increasingly an issue looking over their financials. And it sucks a degree of mystique out of the craft. No one wants to talk about the yucky stuff. So much of the design and aesthetic is awe-inspiring, and especially in this space. But it's hard to ignore the cynical side of the design. That's the trouble with the entire medium. The genre itself is thoroughly compromised by the financial side of things, but it's such a brutal, expensive kind of development, and you're beholden to so many invested people, people you want playing in perpetuity, that MMOs don't get the chance to feel artistic in a way that matters. Serving an audience is almost always the main consideration. It's apparent through most of the company's behind-the-scenes videos. In an industry scarred by constant change, it's hard to create something timeless. Change is baked into Guild Wars 2. It was envisioned as a future Tyria and another step forward for MMOs. It has a world that approximates a lived-in space, even if it can't really offer that realistically, so it received a number of smaller updates that function as miniature expansions, which primarily exist for the story's sake, dubbed Living World, which feature new zones, sometimes zones from the original game done up proper for the sequel, and tend to have world-altering consequences. Lion's Arch is destroyed and rebuilt, leading to layers, and layers of history found in a single in-game location spanning the entire series. You battle real threats to the world, monsters like Kralkatorrik, who managed to terrorize the plot for years before finally meeting his end in a Living World mission, which leads to a whole new zone, for example. In another mission, the player can find the spot he emerged from, that very ridge from the first Guild Wars riddling Grothmar Wardowns. It's not like the world is a real space, but it employs the kind of smoke and mirrors necessary to cast the illusion, even if it's fleeting. And it helps spark the drive to explore, like you haven't really seen the whole world because in a few months, or a year, more places will open up or old ones will change. The world's history is always unfolding, just like they promised on the old box art. It's a minor thing, but this entry was designed to feel artisanal, at least according to the art team. What does that actually mean, though? In terms of mechanics, it means the game is designed with intention, towards solving problems and standing out. Aesthetically, it means any player can take a HUD-less screenshot that looks like realized concept art. Even the trails that accompany player attacks, which are color-coded per class because everyone can tap into a relatively similar pool of weapons, those trails and other particle effects resemble paint, splashing from your blade or bursting from the earth, keying into the visuals used to sell the different races and classes. It's directed at every level, even in small ways. How the living world concept creates snapshots in time, brief moments, and sometimes entirely new visions for the original world, like an artist painting over their canvas a second time. It's an aesthetic delight in ways that further its own design ethos. In case it sounds like Guild Wars is too stuffy, pretentious, too poised and highbrow, it's probably worth mentioning that even the original game had Halloween and Christmas celebrations, or Winter's Day. MMOs are usually made for mass appeal. They kind of need to be for the sake of the business model, but some of the stuff Guild Wars does, man. The sequel has a number of rotating festivals, so there's usually something going on or coming up. And I don't want to overstate the importance of these things, but what they did is add seasonal spots of joy to, again, give some semblance of liveliness to the world. It wasn't static, it was lived in, and thanks to the wildly different cultures in game, some of them are really out there. I've played through a handful of the festivals: Winter's Day, Festival of the Four Winds, Super Adventure Box. I've never been one to waste my precious time screwing around in seasonal material because I am the Grinch and I'm not sorry. And to clarify my position on the matter, fuck the Who's. But I found myself playing through for fun. It's impressive how ArenaNet handled this stuff. Because of horizontal progression and seasonal rewards, there are legitimate reasons to bother engaging with these things. Reasons that align with what you normally do. They had music composed for all of these. And in the case of the Super Adventure Box, if you like retro video games, not just Minecraft or whatever, I'm talking like OG Dragon Quest, East, etc., it's joyful, celebratory in a real way, earnestly compelling stuff that shouldn't be. But because of the obvious effort, all the people playing, Guild Wars feels distinctly human in a more real way than merely being about humans. I think new players suffer with Guild Wars 2 in the exact same way newcomers might struggle with the original. MMOs are about the endgame for most people, and here's a game telling you to slow down and enjoy the run. Live in the world a bit, settle into a homestead. You can always try other things, but please play the story missions. Please engage with the maps, and by the time you've reached or boosted to max level, you might be clueless. What do you do in Guild Wars 2? Fashion mostly, if we're being honest, but presumably because of player interest in PvE stretching back to the first game, PvP is available, but barely spoken of in any context. The game launched with one competitive mode instead of all that. They know their audience, so you aren't getting shoved into a battleground. You have to know what you're looking for. It's mostly divided into regular play and world versus world, which attempts to bridge the divide between major facets of play by roping you into enormous Zerg rushes against enemy teams. What's the pressure if you die exactly? You think anyone has time to notice that you totally ordered your skills wrong? Get in the ball, dweeb! By completing objectives in sweeping maps, the game almost feels like regular old PvE, and most of the really sweaty people should be fighting in the other modes anyway. There's a brilliant intentionality in crafting an experience like this, even if it doesn't explicitly serve either side completely. And there's always room to roam solo if you feel like avoiding the swarm or flexing your skills against helpless casual players. You can totally pwn a guy, but it doesn't really mean anything. The objectives are that way. I'm particularly interested in the way the game mode allows for multiple builds. You can easily take your character in a supportive direction and stick with the ball. Even if you're not clear-cutting enemies down, you're still contributing in a meaningful way, even if it's hard to see the results. Otherwise, you can play the expected way. Many people gravitate towards PvE material, especially because it's already kinetic feeling and challenging enough without adding the toxicity of overtuned kill murder types. But what you might not know is where you're supposed to go, because dungeons, which do exist in the game, but they stopped supporting that kind of content because it wasn't popular, modern dungeons are called fractals. I know, it really encapsulates the idea of a quick PvE romp, doesn't it? Next, you'll tell me raids are called fractures. Fractals are light challenges that scale massively for greater rewards depending on player ability. Like PvP, it's another of the game's many contained ecosystems that uplift the broader design. All activities reward players, so no player is really missing out unless they think they are. Raids and truncated strike missions also exist. To maximize any one aspect of play, you're probably going to want a guild, like you'd expect, but you're allowed to stand apart regardless. A lot of people endlessly chase achievements because a lot of them are directly associated with rewards. The roller beetle from earlier is given after a string of collections which act as a kind of achievement. For example, titles, legendary weapons, simply increasing your mastery and rounding out your character. There are almost limitless things to do on top of the rotating material, festivals and things, which can be really daunting. I know when I played the other game, I only engaged in PvE to reach level cap and strictly stuck to battlegrounds and arenas after that. I just like that game's mechanics and its PvP. And while I could have done that here, I was never drawn to one singular facet of play. I think ultimately it's because I don't feel like I must, In the other game, I felt like I had to get the most out of my time because monthly payments demanded it. Here, the business model is less draining, less cynical, so there is no pressure. While I fully left the other game, I have no reason to leave Guild Wars. I just won't play as much. It was practically designed for the kinds of aging millennials and Gen Xers who built the thing. For the people with responsibilities and kids, and probably paid the price for simply being good instead of demanding. And really, it's probably Guild Wars 2's most obvious design crack. If the game respects your time, if the game appreciates your presence and caters to you, there's no real sense of urgency. MMOs, and especially in the wake of WoW, reward cynical design. We can and should look to the people who make the decisions to weigh great experiences down with predatory monetization and manipulative design, but ultimately, players both accepted and accessed those features. They didn't leave. They didn't divest, they just kept going. How do you topple a giant with clever tactics when you're the size of a bug? Sure, if all the world's people or people who can see said giant work together, maybe. But who said anyone cares to try? Not everyone heard of the little hero trying to take down the giant. Not everyone believes he's a hero. Just a small group of true believers who've been with him all this time. Let's talk about how people talk about Guild Wars. I've enjoyed a handful of MMOs over the years, and they happen to intersect neatly with the rise of games writing because games writing is a very young field, and only leaving total infancy in the years that MMOs were making waves. It follows that plenty of personal essays, or at least some creative nonfiction, should litter the internet. Sopping wet tell-alls, recollections of long-lost friends, stories of personal growth, anything artistic. Admittedly, there are a surprising number of videos focused on the beauty of Guild Wars 2, that's the title, and other kinds of environmental showcase material, which I can understand. It's a truly captivating space, so why not capture it? The game looks amazing, especially with the HUD turned off, because it's intricately designed for aesthetic beauty. Any given viewpoint could be a painting. In this way, players let images do the writing for them. They're worth 1,000 words, I hear. And that's something, but 1,000 words isn't even 5 minutes read quick enough. Increasingly, games writing is found on YouTube because it's the cultural moment, the super site, and the last chance many of us will have to scrape a few pennies out of Google's vast corporate coffers before the world burns. So why is it, when I search for Guild Wars videos, almost everything is content? That's content in quotation marks, in case it wasn't clear. In fact, there's actually more creative nonfiction found in the comments sections of various Guild Wars soundtrack videos. People love telling their stories. People love remembering those lost days. But Guild Wars, like as a series, suffers from a pointed lack of community storytelling. Despite its many ambassadors, a rotating roster of folks partnered with ArenaNet, not to diminish what they do, they're serving their audience, and that's fine. And some of them do make really high-quality material, so let's not whine about them. Really, it's not a Guild Wars specific problem. World of Warcraft is one of the most popular games ever made, and most fan-made material consists of compiled lore and videos concerning every aspect of the mechanical experience, raids, classes, PvP, etc. All the same old stuff. It's not particularly surprising and not really a problem. MMORPGs tend to be mechanically intensive and always evolving, necessitating steady stream coverage for interested contemporary players. Truly, there's no need for some dude to cry into a camera about any video game. I mean, I do that, but still, you'd expect at least a little more of that kind of material in such a strong setting, with such emotional stories, such a lengthy history. You know, people make long-winded, emotional videos about, like, Donkey Kong. So why not Guild Wars? Part of the problem is length. Guild Wars is ruthlessly challenging to record, demanding your time and skill in heaping piles if one intends to complete every campaign. And if both games are tossed into the mix, a scope is necessary to bring the project into focus. Without a scope, you end up regurgitating the events of Guild Wars prophecies, and then factions, and then Nightfall, and Eye of the North. So the fictional essayist in question can finally place the daintiest of cherries atop their vomit mountain. Guild Wars was good, and then they made another one. To complicate things further, most people willing to produce content about MMOs online are already sometimes willing to use AI tools, instantly discrediting any kind of artistic intentionality, and others don't want to use their time to make something memorable, but rather something immediately useful, and Guild Wars is poised, especially in its gradual decline, to miss out on any kind of reflective coverage. There are so many "Is Guild Wars 2 worth playing in 20xx videos?" because That's all games are to people. Worth your money, worth your time. Escape. Endless content and escape. The promise of occupation. We do not care how the systems affect us, what the mechanics mean, just that games help us slowly circle the drain. I want to blame logistics alone. MMOs are impossibly huge. No video could snapshot the entire picture, but then no video should. This is Guild Wars 2. This is your story. Complete takes on a work of art being something we can acknowledge the developers presume towards, should be viewed with suspicion. Comprehensive and complete are the words of information collators and categorizers, bureaucrats, not interpreters, and definitely not storytellers. No single-play experience of an MMO will ever be complete unless that person entirely forfeits their time and compulsively engages in a way I'd argue is unhealthy for any person's relationship with media. So I guess that's where the stories went. ArenaNet's About Us page affixed to their Guild Wars 2 website is stamped with the text, quote, "Games are art, we bring art to life." And while that's true in a very palpable way, given that Guild Wars 2 takes up the mantle passed from its progenitor and attempts to transpose the iconic impressionist concept art to polygons, it's also core to ArenaNet's design ethos. It wants players to know that Guild Wars is crafted, artisanal, and so it gives us concept art races and classes. There's a visible interest in typography. Cutscenes are sometimes handled like other 3D games, but others make use of graphic design techniques, feature transitions that bespeak material made for the digital age. Guild Wars 2, from its medieval fantasy roots to its techno-fantasy future, lives and breathes in the turning years and the passing minutes, all told with aesthetics. I made a big fuss about the visuals of the first game, and that fascination actually started here. I got looking into Guild Wars because of the way its sequel sells itself visually. It's maybe the most significant aspect of the broader series. Other games do not sell their playable races like Guild Wars 2 does. You'll see fully rendered models or explicit character art. Doesn't it make you want to play? Of course, this game wants to style itself as painterly, so it brushes them onto the page. They're not fully realized. Just enough is given to evoke an idea, but the physical reality is never made whole until the player logs in. It's a smart decision. I don't want to call the character models ugly per se, but part of why I originally stopped playing this game so many moons ago was that the humans in Norn tended to look like weird porcelain dolls, and it was mildly repulsive. Why is he looking at me like that? Why is he staring like that? It's not out of character per se. The original was adamant about making most characters beautiful, compared to WoW, where... But higher fidelity graphics so willing to capture a world in full detail tend to make the minute details pop. Maybe a little too much. Humans and Norns often end up standing out, practically glowing compared to the rest of the world that, unlike them, does have imperfections and wrinkles and ridges. They look a little weird.
Lish was the only one I told. I thought he might be able to help me stay here longer,
Sad
but
scene.
now he's...
And then Smash gets a blubbering baby. Your head looks like a pin. Like, what if Caillou grew up on a mountain? And this isn't a problem for the other races who all slot in flawlessly. The Char are imposing and fierce. The Asura are practically alien. And the Sylvari, the youngest race, is naturally and appropriately textured so they don't stick out like angelic dolls, but feel like real living beings in the world. And to be clear, there's a lot of wiggle room in character creation to fix up anything that looks off, but it's smart to leave the races as ideas instead of concrete examples. After all, it's not their job to tell you who you are. And as we know, this is your story. The tendency to sell only an idea is visible across most of Guild Wars. As you'll recall from the relevant discussion in the first game, the world is often prepackaged and sold with impressionist concept art. In the original, the world could not possibly be rendered in full due to hardware limitations. And now, no matter how bizarre or complex, the developers are working with significantly more powerful tools. They have every ability to recreate in fine detail any fantastical concept the artists scratch out. And they do. Guild Wars 2 is one of the most heart-achingly beautiful computer games I've ever seen. And it's not any single element or the raw fidelity, it's direction. The world is vast and often highly vertical. Enormous, open environments, sometimes stuffed with players, make the thing feel like the truly modern MMO it promised to be. The game is now over a decade old, so its earliest zones don't live up to the same standard of beauty of the more modern ones, but even with those limitations, the world is alive, cycling between night and day. Intricate construction allows for actual exploration and the perpetual invitation to adventure. Make the game world something you want to escape into. Splash yourself into those hues and shades.
Okay, so I've flown down into this crack, and there's a person. Can we get a wellness check on this guy? Bro, what are you doing here?
They make use of contrasting colors, bold tones you wouldn't find in more traditional medieval fantasy locales that lend a kind of magic to the world. Zones often seem like more than they are, but actually back it up with area-specific mysteries and mechanics and events. The disparity between the implied world and the actual world is starkly apparent when the games are placed side by side, except in some choice instances, Guild Wars Prophecies was flat and plain, arguably more ruin than world, while heading overseas helped to sharpen the mental image, ground the fuzzy concept art in more defined places with palpable histories carved into the terrain itself. Tyria wasn't all that fantastical even still. Most of the magical elements were the fallout of disaster, things that warped the world into something truly befitting a fantasy setting. It was so attentive to making the places feel real that it ended up feeling a little forlorn. Hardly the concept they started with, and Eye of the North both recognized and responded to that initial failing by rounding out the rest of playable Tyria with jungles and golden plains. A return to the fantastical. Following suit, most of the sequel zones are innately whimsical, awe-inspiring, breathtaking, and again, the earliest zones tend to be lower key, but the more of Tyria you explore, the more you'll see use of contrasting colors, opposing climates of the same region, powerful, stunning landmarks that outscale the player characters so fully you remember your place in the world. Towering waterfalls rip down the sides of unscalable mountains, statues and relics of bygone empires litter otherwise unclaimed lands. Wherever you go, something magical is lying in wait. And remember, these are evolving places. The events of the original Guild Wars took place centuries ago, and the world moved on. The Char were driven back, and the Mad King of Ascalon doomed his own people to eternal servitude in death. And now the ghosts of that era walk the earth, locked in eternal conflict with the Char. No matter how far things have advanced, old specters still haunt this land. Cantha underwent rapid change over a very short period of time with technological advances, while Alona still suffers from Joko the Lich's influence. Someone actually compared a number of old locations to their sequel counterparts with screenshots linked below, and what's fascinating is how many of these places are designed with respect for the original versions. It's legitimately impressive that developers looked over those old maps and made sure to texture in some of their details to preserve their integrity. Sometimes world-changing events have rippled through those places, leaving them derelict or ruined. Sometimes they're more or less unchanged. I think there's beauty in that, a world that's at once familiar and utterly alien, even when you know all the names. Cantha underwent severe reconstruction, so it deserves a special look. While lots of little places from the original still dot the land, notably the bulk of Xingjia Island, the mainland's Kaineng City became an entire science fantasy, almost cyberpunk urban cityscape. It actually bothered me a little when I first saw it, but I think I see the inspirations. When I taught in South Korea years ago, I often came across old clay pots and brutally weathered buildings set cheek by shoulder with apartment complexes and outlet malls. I was told by multiple people that the deeply rural areas, long recovering from occupation and economic struggles, suddenly hit a boom some 40 years prior, and so urban high-rises ate up entire city blocks, often built in and around once rural places. In the town I lived in, Hunsan, there was an entire traditional Korean village sitting on top of a hill, surrounded by an ocean of urban construction. It's one of the coolest parts of that entire country, seeing vertical strip malls sat alongside traditional pottery salesmen and little patches of farmland. And it reminds me a lot of New Kaineng City, actually, at least in spirit. Just seeing futuristic technology carved into the old stone conjures that exact image. Walking down the way from the farmer's market to enter the local pishibang in the basement of a double-decker retail store. I bring this up because people like to say, oh, that's kind of stupid. I liked how it was before. But again, like everything in Guild Wars, there's an intentionality informing design decisions. Cantha as a place in the world was left with a sea of jade thanks to a localized catastrophe. And instead of simply leaving it, they turn to mining it, which we saw in the original, but given that this is a breathing world, Canthans are now harnessing the stone for various economic and technological purposes. In the plot, jade is still an issue. It's a land caught up in a whirlwind of changes, and it's fertile ground to tell a unique story in this particular setting. Which is why Ilona isn't all that different. Not every Guild Wars story is about the same things. The world of Guild Wars 2 ultimately fulfills the promise of the first game's concept art. Before, those pieces helped deliver what the visuals never could. A real sense of fantasy, a call to the unknown. But now that the art nearly matches the world, Tyria feels real. I can fly out to those once distant pagodas on my dragon, but nobody is here. Probably because it'd be wasteful to bother filling them with distant aristocrats when most players will never approach them, but moments like these, realizing the backdrops are simply backdrops, the towering impossible castles are just about as finished as pre-searing Ascalons, effectively shunt the player back into the world, deny them from delving too far into the fantasy. Maybe Tyria is only ever what you imagine it is. This dynamic trickles down into the broader body of concept work. The classes, like the races, are sold as ink blots, smears, strokes, and scratches. It's not actually a thief, it's the idea of a thief. But you can never really become those things. You'll only ever be a plain 3D model aspiring to the fantasy the developers painted for you. This might seem small, but I want to highlight one of the elite specializations. As expansions were released, ArenaNet used some pretty fantastical art to sell its new class options. But take a look at the Firebrand here from Path of Fire. You will never play as this person. It is functionally impossible to look this good. The art suggests a ghostly figure, almost floating. If not for the legs, we can imagine we're left out of frame. Pages fly out of an old tome, and the intentionally reduced hues, for the sake of class identity, implies something far more ethereal than the player actually controls. If you play as a Firebrand, you do get access to tomes, and different spell effects conjure ghostly weapons, but no matter what you do, you're still imprisoned in whatever character you made in the beginning, draped with whatever armor you own. This is an impossible ideal to strive for. Now, this is all an unfortunate consequence of using only blues and grays to signify this Firebrand here is an offshoot of the Guardian Core class for marketing purposes. Other elite specs from Path of Fire don't have this exact issue, often betraying more realistic interpretations of the class, simply by accessing a wider palette. While this method of selling new ways to play your favorite class started with the Heart of Thorns expansion and had almost completely fallen off by End of Dragons, where characters are drawn fairly explicitly, the intention was not to mislead, like in the world's concept art, but to leave room for player interpretation. That's why they draw attention to individual pieces of armor or weapons. They're new takes on old classes that you're left to discover yourself. And this is the crux of the issue. In other MMOs with more explicit art direction, you probably have a clear idea of who you are. In WoW, with its enormous, staggering heroes, you always have someone greater to compare yourself to and ultimately aspire to become. Demon Hunters have Illidan, Death Knights have Arthas, Mages, Warlocks, Hunters. There are so many people to eventually become. In a world you probably know, and even if you don't, it's all rendered plainly. But in Guild Wars, with only a handful of genuinely resonant heroes and villains, and a flat 2 years of rapid-fire development, a blink of a legacy, you aren't trying to live up to anyone's example. In a sense, you're adrift. In this place you may or may not know, you may or may not still recognize, wandering from place to place and mingling with its people, carving out your own name and your own legend, with no statue to model yourself after, and a world in need. Guild Wars 2 is a monument to those who answer the call. Maybe I've been talking about games for too long, but the series does speak to me in a specific way. On a few brief occasions, I've talked about Romantic-era poetry, so poems from some 150 years ago, mostly about nature, about finding yourself, and even God in the natural world, or at least that's how those people wrote about it. A little high-minded. I've always resonated with their words, and not always with the poems about nature. I loved Keats' ruminations on love and death, for example, but because that kind of poetry is heavily influenced by the era for which it was composed, informed by that lived socio-political reality, the British enclosure movement, etc., the natural world is the main focus. And despite my personal interest in the writing, I've never really been about nature. I really dislike camping because I was made to camp so many times as a young person when I actually wanted to play video games. It happened enough that I eventually grew resentful of the entire concept. Nature was never sold to me as something really enjoyable, but as work. Or a chore. Something you visited because you had to. I still get outside nowadays. I still get outside, I swear. As a person who wanted to write poetry and did write poetry, as a person who loved the Romantics, I'm always struck by the patheticism of my current position. All of my writing is about digital worlds. Almost everything I've written for actual years is centered on a reflection of the real thing. Not even our own world. Fictional worlds. I like talking about aesthetics. I like finding meaning in these spaces. I've done that throughout this video. It's almost painful to imagine what the Romantics would think about this kind of writing. It's distinctly unromantic. It's perverse, obsessed with the crafted and synthetic. There is no true warmth in a virtual facsimile of a world. There is no God in the polygons or the textures. And yet, I've become a digital romantic, sifting through pixels and systems to escape the space beyond the screen. But I'm also a product of my era. A person can make more money with YouTube videos than with poetry in general. Maybe none of the Romantics would survive in our modern corporate hellscape. They faced the tyranny of fences, but I'm a weed in concrete. And I'm not trespassing here. Of course, I had to buy a ticket for the privilege. Without some kind of privilege, I wouldn't have had the chance to read old poems by very dead people written about nature. I don't know how invested I really am in the whole concept the more I dig. I am not a proper romantic. I studied all that stuff over a decade ago, and that's about the last time I wrote about it meaningfully. I don't read it for fun very often, and even though I've taught it in a high school setting, I think I'm just clinging to the memory of something I liked. Because it was the kind of writing I liked doing in even earlier years. Writing about the beauty of imagined spaces, imagining warmth in fiction. And there is a specific warmth to online multiplayer experiences, even if the spaces are false. In an increasingly independent and atomized society, connecting with others in a place, virtual or not, is the closest to healing, or God, or whatever the Romantics saw in woods and meadows, as some people are going to get. Many of those writers were free to wander, and many of us are not. Is it really a surprise that as gates closed and places shuttered, academic institutions grew more insular, financially prohibitive, and the 9-to-5 flourished, that imagining behind an empty box got so popular? I think it's a symptom of changing times. Sitting in front of a screen in a dark room, if the screen darkens for a moment and you catch your reflection, it's hard to do anything but reflect on the self and slip into solipsism. There's good in Guild Wars from its hills to its bones, and especially in its people, but in a circus of competing attractions, nothing and no one escapes the mirror gallery. There's this concept I've been rotating in my head for a very long time, after just enough bizarre experiences with other people, that I've begun calling the mirror gallery. Though maybe funhouse is more accurate. The idea isn't new or complicated, just inescapable. Whoever you are, no matter where you come from or what you've done or how you appear or how you speak, whatever you are, fundamentally can only ever be known to you. What you are is whatever you imagine yourself to be, and whatever evidence you have to prove it. Actions, mostly. You are a reliable, hardworking person because you diligently work a frustrating job, but make good money. Or so you tell yourself. You overhear another coworker complaining about how much of an arrogant prick you are for whatever reason, and realize you could confront the coworker, or could try to correct the record, and that it would probably only end up making things worse, so you very likely say nothing. You speak up for yourself and dig a hole, or don't speak up for yourself and let the conversation get away from you. It feels like, as far as human perception goes, there's no real way to control outcomes. We're always the subjects of perception. Everyone's heard, that teacher doesn't like me, or said it themselves. Most people have had a manager who mistreated them for no apparent reason. Every one of us deals with perception to some degree or another. The eyes remain unblinking, and all of us find ourselves perceived, torn apart, and receive constant social feedback for simply existing. It's why I'm amazed anyone goes out of their way to be awful to others, because it's definitely coming back, whether they want it or not. But why make the world better anyway? Other people in unison form the mirror gallery. Whatever the truth of something is, it will only ever live in perpetual distortion by people with incomplete information. It is impossible for anything to exist otherwise, except in total isolation. If you exist, you live in the gallery. If a piece of art is spoken of, it's propped up in the gallery. To live is to be observed. We weren't built for total isolation, so we swim in the eyes. And who cares? Everybody lives their life in first person, and we surely don't have the capacity to act like full-time saints. It's probably best to keep moving regardless. But maybe you think the world would be a little better if we could stretch our imaginations just far enough to stabilize that other person's shimmering outline. That was all a little abstract and a bit off topic. Or it would be if it didn't describe the reality of the series. Two completely separate identities persisting through years and filtered through so many individual lenses. It's even baked into play. So much of the endgame is about fashion or prestige and having an absurdly high mastery level and a rare title, having a cooler dragon than somebody else. You can work for it or buy it, but either way, you want something. To differentiate yourself, make your status visible. Horizontal progression means that everybody's on the same basic playing field, but you can still outrun other players on that long track. In either game, really. Well, that's the cynical take, and it's the context the developers layered on top of the core offering. Of course, people who play MMOs are looking for the human element. Regardless of the artifice, the humanity is the warmth. All of us who play these kinds of games are digital romantics looking for meaning in otherwise meaningless spaces. And even in these digital worlds crafted for people adrift in a circus of a planet, we cannot escape the mirror gallery. We can try. We can slip into instances and blend into the ball, but we're not untangling ourselves from the grasping vines of the core mechanics. Build, skill, and we're all participants. We've crafted the games we play in our own image as best we can through our preferred play styles and builds and identity and all that. And Guild Wars 2 asked for our input. Invited us to imagine ourselves in their world. You can't really run from something you're meshed into. The only real problem with being perceived and reflected in wildly different screens is when no one can agree on what you are, or should be, either way. It's hard to fully stabilize an image of this series. If you've hung around an MMO for any length of time, you've seen the complaints. Forums with thousands of posts dedicated to tearing down or criticizing whichever game is doing, and usually without the full perspective. It's always from a specific lens. Balance decisions, artistic decisions, mechanical changes, any individual element of any game broken down to the absolute minutia and picked over by vultures. It's not an evil practice. Feedback is necessary for something designed to exist for as long as possible, and no one team has all the information. But it's uniquely interesting to look at how Guild Wars is spoken of because of its position in the broader gaming landscape. MMOs in general, really, if you exist to serve everybody, how can you serve anybody? If you look up any particular class or mechanic, you're usually led to a forum where people excruciate over changes, differences, expectations, and it's usually those who only play an MMO that end up in its forums trying to rake the team over the coals. But you almost never see people earnestly excited about the interesting things the game is doing. Those don't often warrant their own topics. Good is expected. Bad is the only thing worth talking about. It's what you expect for trying new things, though. Guild Wars 2 is a visionary MMO. It's not just dragon riding. WoW cribbed all kinds of stuff over the years. Seeing the game spoken of as a cheap knockoff by old fans and outsiders for earnestly putting in the work is painful. I feel bad for anyone, collective or otherwise, caught up in that gallery. That stifling panopticon is a real source of pressure, enough to break some people, mold them into an expected form or the appearance of one, whether or not they can keep the illusion up forever. Many people, most people, probably perform identity, calculate their actions and appearance for the sake of others. Even companies do this. The vast majority of ArenaNet's own advertising makes a point of highlighting the importance of the community, of the player. Not that other companies don't do this, but ArenaNet wants to convince people, more than other companies do, that you're being considered. If something exists because of other people, it should at least acknowledge that fact. But if the intention is to craft something unique and original and boundary pushing, it probably needs to shut out the eyes, like any of us have to if we want to preserve ourselves. It's an MMO from Ex-Blizzard staff that dared to stand against the Titan itself, made promises, invented and reinvented, and did not bend to its older base. For choosing to stand alone, it's never not been the subject of distortion. Many old-school players ruthlessly despise what Guild Wars 2 is. The game's not for them, which we've all heard before, and fair enough. I'd argue Guild Wars 1 is so unique, and so fine, so particular, it can only really speak to an innately small group of people. The sequel was much louder and much more inviting, and that alone, regardless of forward-thinking design, was betrayal enough. There's another world where ArenaNet simply made Guild Wars 1, 2, where those older systems were preserved and recompiled into something aesthetically appealing to a, quote, wider audience. But I think it's obvious that that game doesn't need to exist. Trawling through the comment sections of various videos and OSTs, it's not particularly hard to find people suggesting as much. Why not respect your community and make a prettier version of this classic game? A better version. Screw outsiders, we like what we have and intend to play it forever. All 500 of us. Just please bring it back. Make it feel like it did back then. Make it feel like when times were easier. I don't want to call those kinds of people Luddites or start shadowboxing with a very real but very fragmented player base. I guess I'm reminded of old Ascalon. Sun-dappled cobble roads accompanied by ancient trunks with gilded bows all adorned by drifting flecks of gold. A place conjured during development's final moments to act as a tinderbox. Guild Wars has a small community of players who make characters that remain exclusively in pre-searing Ascalon, people who choose not to move on, or more accurately, choose not to go back. Away from the endless innovations and tired conversations, they create characters, level them from 1 to 20, and leave them there. Hang out with other longtime players, and without much to do, I should add. This region only has so many quests and so many locations, large as it is. But they play it anyway. You gotta understand, back in the day, before ArenaNet changed some things, added Vanguard quests to make leveling easier, people used to do what's called death leveling, pulling whole regions of mobs, allowing themselves to be killed in their presence to level up the enemies to a sufficient level to allow them to gain experience from those monsters. I mean, half the fun was the novelty of it all, but it's also uniquely interesting from the digital romantic angle. People use this rift in time, this pocket dimension, as a means of finding warmth in spite of its disposability. Whether for fun or nostalgia or preservation, it's both almost sad and kind of beautiful. This mode of play is contrived, its limitations fake, but people are playing there anyway. I can't imagine never leaving the starting zone in any other game. Maybe because there's never a reason to. You can always go back. Home is always waiting. Just not in Tyria. Guild Wars Reforged, which hardly altered the core experience and largely exists to consolidate the original game as cleanly as possible for Steam, actually brought a new dungeon to pre-searing specifically, something that has no purpose except to more fully round out an experience you're meant to abandon, and exclusively in service to the people who stand vigil in that space. People lingering like the ghosts of old Ascalon in Guild Wars 2. It's the kind of thing that emblemizes the team's integrity, honoring its past while they focus on the present, in a small gesture. No strategic goal, no real reason, another tilt of the kaleidoscope for a remembered world that most will never see, and doomed to eventual collapse, a nod to the players who came before. You can move on or stay still. It's your story after all. And what would that story be if somebody else wrote it? Guild Wars struggles in its mercurial present state, ever shifting and collectively imagined into existence by a fading population, while the old guard gives way, its hardened final few rusting in place where leaves fall but never gather. Hey, thanks for making it to the end. Here's my $4 patrons. Let me blow your ears out. Adam Welsh. This is me, the author A.G. Charlton, bullying K-Bash to read Tomes of Ascension. Air Pirate Sid. A.K. Acropolon. Alexander Yod. Alpha 42. Emperor Sandy. Angel Rivera. Angus. Anthony. Ha! Aralog. Aria. Aaron. Ashley, my wife. My darling. I asked K-Bash to make you smile. Also Chimera, Azrael, Azura, Atticure, Owleye, Axonate, Bear Skeleton, Basement Dweller, Bosch 7, Basil, Be Gay, Do Crimes, Bella, more like Smella, Bell Peppers and Beef, Ben M, Beguile, Big Damn Gamer, Big Papa Spray, Big Brick, Biodigital Jazzman, Bite of Cursed Sushi, Blake Against the Machine, Largle Hargle, Blossom Dante, Boom Dead, BH Operator, Orgor, Born in Shadow, Brendan Hanna-Barger, Brandon S, Brendan Hesse, British Goose, Brian McKnight, Cal, Cajun Lady, Cake Czar, C-Dub, Casual Male XL, Caesar T, Cherokee Bowler, Chiro Hero, Chloric Fox, Cordon, Chris Bromo, Cody Golden, Comfy Moogle, Kami Hog, Couch MOBA, Cosmetic, Crabmonger, Fish Finagler, Trashkers, Crater, Crispy J, Chrono 19G, Cup of the Puffer, CW Glassworks, Cyborg Jiro, Danky Steak, Swacky Bay, David Castillo, Dara, Dash Granny, Deadward, Destrega, DeFore. Did you know if you put a wooden spoon on your pot while it's boiling, the pot spoon water will spill the water pot, the boiling pot water steams spoon wood? Dingus back. Don't read this out loud. Oh no, he did it! Doodle Flu, Doug Prince, DJ Professor K, Dr. House from the critically acclaimed television show House MD, Dr. Cullen PhD, Drop the Bait, Duffman, the protagonist, the antagonist, Dylan Winston, Eclair, Edward Bazinga, El Jaguar, Electric Song, Elefal, Alpio, Emperor Pickle, Empty Tenchi, Eric Monticello, Erica Black, Excalibur Shines, Exorian Hagen, Thnar, Farrakhan's just happy to be Burns here, Maximum, Fazillion, Forte Noir, Forsyth, Frog Vorbis, Frolf Judge, Frosty Gamer, Gandalf the Garen, Guaranteed, Gigglebite, Glyph Seeker, Gobo Bobo, Gobsmack, Goose 6112, Goose Dolly, Gray the Darkest Black, Griffey Turner, Guardcore, Gucci Plant, Happening Druid, Hatsune Miku's Crack House, Archive, Heeman, Game & Station, Helen Dingo, Hermit J, Hebe, Highwind 36, read that however which way you please. Honey Mutt, Horn Tiger, Horse Boots. How do you know? I just took 7 grams of magic mushrooms and now I'm lost in the woods. Imagination Act. I'm supporting K-Bash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Inferno galore. IOBG. I punched a sandwich. It's not bad. It's time to sue. It's not good. Jack Hydrick. Jacob. Jalopy. James. Jams. Jank Dankins. Jason Lasky. Jaden. James Vaughn. Jar of Screaming Eyes. Jay Drito. JL Savaras. Jay Deus. JB. Jetty2. JJ09. JK Hedgehog. John Bo the Joker. Jordan Joyner. Jorzy Burden. Juicy Frost. July. Lunar Butterfly. June. Kadoki. Callie. K-Chan. Keegan Too Cool. Keith the Thief. Key the Iron Idol. Kata Snack. King Kuma. Keej. Killian. Kimi no Aibaga. Kanite Pike. Karasek. Kitty Caddis. Clock. Tenoi. Cone 2020. Clayton. Crazy Dark Chocolate. Crumperton. Kyle. Kyle, not that Kyle. KZ Excellent. Lady Weeb. Lasset. Larry Rowland. Laundry Mom. Lego Sid. Lethal Nibbles. Linkle. Little Big Trouble. Loathsome Dung Eater. Lion Shard. Lon. Low Red. Low Fat Mogert. Lucas Sight. Lucas Boy. Lucky Dagger. Blood Mac James. Lunatic. Lunar Prince Garbo. Magnet Head. Magic Meows. Malamatic Wolf. Manapool. Manic Pixie Space Pirate. Man in Space. Malfever. Mara Ganger. Marcules. Marcus Rambles. Max Muller. Maxwell B. Maximum Dawn. Meaty Smacks. Mechanized Memories. Maple Puppet. Mega Boy E Nasty. Mellytan. Mary Bite. Messiah of Rodents. Metal Gear Gashes. Michelle Citrano. Migsy. Mike Deviar. Mikusagi. Minadams. Noodles. Mithras. Moa. Mommy Dummy Big Titty Got GF Queen. Monochrome Rainbow. Morgana Black. Maury. Morn. Morte. Modi. Mr. Mango. Mr. PP Pupukaka. Mr. Edie Dab Face McYoink Bomb. Moogie. Myrna. Naira. Nito Torpedo. Neon Dwarf. Nick Krishna. Nick LaRosa. Nifty Rex. Noah McFarlane. Not Nobel. Oh, Dominate. Hell, I forgot to think of something funny for the K-Bash credits. Next month for sure. Okami. OJ McMuffins. Oh, Burgle. Old Man Cranberry. Ollie. Omni Nerd Zero. 137. Only LK. Kaplant. Oscar. Owlbear Breakfast. Paper Lancy. PBK. Pandemic Cowboy. Pelagic Undulation. PK Gaming. P-Mike. Popular Hitman. Prismatic Dan. Pringle. Probably not great. Project Darklight. Punch Fighter Champion. Honosaurus Rex. Pinksy. Quasar McDougal. Quiet Night. Quillworth. Raging Ataraxia. Real Beans. Reasonable Dingus. Red Death. Reggie Rodriguez. Renteca Bond. Ringed Relay. Oh, his arm fell off. Rowlett's Bowtie. Rolando. RP Gamer. Are you okay? Busta Whoa! Ryan Michelle. Saigon Man. Siren Smells Good. Salmon Coder. Salsa. Salty Smasher. Gabriel. Scribe Slendy. Sakaya no Award. Sensual Coder. Saphirium. Sexy Bionicle GF. Sergeant Shitbrick. Shod. Shintendo. Shut up, Wesley. Singe. Sim. God. Sir Doodles a lot. Seriously tired of waiting in line. Sir Giggles XD. Sir Speedster. Skywardly. Sleepy Wabbit. Slippy Sloppy Bippy Boppy. Snart. Small Turtle House. So Zeta Dad. Sock'em Boppers. Space Lizard. Sparks. Spider Dad. Squidget. Star Night Sky. Static Linkage. Streffin Battles. Sully. Sunny Bee. Super Sandwich Guy. Toxin. Jorn Chubbington. Terrence Swift. Thanks, Goku. The artist formerly known as Sam the Sam. The Big Bubby. The Brandorian. The Clown Prince of Cringe. The Good Lord has blessed me. Hallelujah. The Green Loki. The King of Fables. The Chris Crispy
the
Boy,
Peacemaker Pyro,
the Pirates of
the
Penzance,
Salt
the
Knight,
Nomad,
the Toasted One,
Thick Dick
This is
Mystic,
the Monato's Power,
Thresh,
Trips Hartrop,
Tiggles McGuffin,
Tim Lobster,
Timid the Writer,
Total Play,
Travis Edwards,
Trinon,
Twiddle Chungus,
Ty Guy 9001,
Udit Singh,
Unlawful Skies Crippling Gotcha Addiction,
Vid,
Vacant Plaza,
Valenrist,
Veloy,
Venom,
Verum
Leonhardt,
Vice Pup,
Viewers Like You,
Vic,
Volkento,
Walk in, get right in my bag,
Wapoza,
Wayne is boss,
We will never have world peace until Candyland is a UN member state.
Weeb Trash,
Who else?
Shit,
Waylon,
What's in a Name,
Where am I?
Whiskey
Help!
Dono,
Ouija,
Wrenching,
Zanny Tanner,
Giandi,
Travius,
Zudaverse,
Yairo 12,
Yashichi,
Iniane,
Zane the Impure,
Zane the Pure,
Zephigamon,
Full Burner,
Zero Maru 2,
Zero Zalazar,
Cyberbunk.
Ooh, is it done?
If you'd like to help support the show, help me keep investing, making interesting looks at the medium, hit me up on Patreon. See you soon. K-Bash out.